Welcome to the fourth and the last week of our Black America Summit 2. We are Black at it again. Over the last month, the month of August, we've been exploring the current state of Black America in 2021. And I hope to continue our nonprofit's mission to unite, educate, strategize, and inspire. Honestly, I've been so inspired by you all and the phenomenal panelists we've had over the last few weeks. And today's theme is wealth. We have three incredible panels in store for you all, beginning with the panel on cannabis industry and ending with a panel about DEI and the workplace. This year's summit would not have been possible without the sponsorship of Arts Business Collaborative, donations from you all, and incredible support from my BAS team, including Vicki Nakope and Jessica Nicely Williams. They've worked tirelessly with me to pull off Black America Summit 2. And so before we begin our first panel, I want to give a special thanks to you all as the audience for taking time to join us today. I also want to welcome you all to share your thoughts and comments throughout today's panels because our summits are a line of communication for you with subject matter experts and industry leaders. So we truly, truly value your comments and your responses. So without any further delay, let's begin our week 4 of Black America Summit 2 with Naomi and building wealth through the cannabis industry. So we'll just give that just one moment.
Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Gave you something, you ain't know you want it. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to just introduce us first to get everything started, and then I'm so hyped for this conversation and to hear what's going on. It looks like we're going to wait a little bit while Vanessa comes on, but in the meantime, I'll introduce everything. So welcome, everyone. This panel is called Building Wealth Through Cannabis. We're exploring less explored career paths and asking our panelists to share their thoughts on new ways to build wealth during this pandemic. So to introduce folks, I'll start with Ayana Edward. Ayana is a cannabis industry marketing specialist at MJI Canna Marketing and a content creator. She hosts the podcast Wine, Weed, and Weave and is the creator of Kush and Cute and the Hemp Honey Shop.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Me too. I'll next introduce Todd Scott. Todd is a managing partner of Global Recruiters Scottsdale, and after a 25-year career in the consumer packaged goods industry, managing $140 million in business and leading a team of salespeople, category management analysts, and marketing specialists, he now brings that wide-ranging expertise to the developing strategic staffing solutions for the food and beverage, CPG, and cannabis industries. Their business, they partner also with private equity and venture capital groups to find executives for key leadership roles in the companies in which you invest. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited. So it doesn't look like Vanessa is here yet, but I will introduce her. And when she comes, we'll just hop on. So Vanessa Jean-Baptiste will also join us. She's the first Black woman to open a fully recreational dispensary on the East Coast called Legal Greens, located in Brockton, Massachusetts. She was also born and raised in Brockton and opened the new dispensary with the hopes of bringing positive impact to her community. So I'm so excited to have everybody here. And I'm going to start with just an umbrella a question, right? It can go all the ways anyway. But our umbrella question is, how would you define the cannabis industry generally and then particularly in your state? So maybe we can start, Ayana's thinking there. Maybe we can start with Ayana and then move to Todd.
Oh man, how would you define the cannabis industry? That's a great question because it's so new and it's always changing, and it's kind of hard to define because it's so new and always changing. But to me, I definitely define the cannabis industry as a space that's not only an industry you can make money off of, but it's also a community, and it's also an educational hub, because no matter what you're selling, no matter what you're doing, no matter who you're talking to, those two things are kind of always going to be a part of the industry. Is there's a community side, there's patients that have been using this plant for years and they're kind of re-understanding the new dynamic of the dispensaries. There's people who are trying it for the first time. There are people who are, looking to be business owners, and everyone's part of kind of a sub community in the industry. As like particular me, I'm part of the women of color and cannabis community, which is just a smaller community within cannabis. And then also just like having, an understanding of the plant and how it works and what it does for your body and your mind. That education factor is always in there. And I really appreciate that education is such a big part of the cannabis industry as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. There's so much I want to unpack there, but I also want to pass that question on to Todd as well. How would you define the cannabis industry generally and then particularly in your state?
Generally, usually the first word I use to describe it is chaotic, because in addition to what Ayana said, it is dynamic and changing all the time, which is what makes it really exciting. Probably what frustrates a lot of people getting into the space is it is so chaotic, especially if they come from a more traditional consumer goods background or something like that. But it's exciting, and it is a community, and it's a place where I think people can accomplish a lot, and the industry, since it's growing so fast, needs a lot of different types of skill sets and mindsets and people that will really get involved and promote the product, the good positive things about it, and because there are a lot of very positive things about the industry. So but as far as in particular in my state, I live in Arizona, but I work all over the country. So it's kind of in Arizona, the adult use law passed in November. So there's a lot going on here with a lot of companies expanding, et cetera. But like I said, I work all over the country. So it's really, it's similar everywhere. It's a little bit chaotic, but it's a booming industry. It's exciting to be in because it's one of the fastest growing industries in the country. When you hear, especially last year, when you heard so many companies that were struggling, with the shutdowns and everything else, the cannabis industry on the most part was thriving. So it continues to do so. It makes it a very exciting place to be.
Wow. Did you have something that you wanted to add to that, Ayana?
Oh no, I definitely agree on the chaotic part. That's all.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those answers. Something that's really that I appreciate what both of you highlighted about the cannabis industry is that there is the business element of it, right? Like you can build wealth in this industry, and there's the community and there's the benefits. And so I really like that it sounds balanced in terms of you can have financial wealth, but also you can help your community. And so in that sense, I want to hear more about how each of you got into the cannabis industry. What drove you, and I guess what continues to excite you in your work? Ayana?
So I got in the cannabis industry in 2016, straight out of college. It wasn't my plan to get in the cannabis industry. It didn't exist when I went to college. And I got my degree in journalism, actually. I grew up in Texas. I'm from Houston, Texas. I was born in Brockton, Massachusetts, actually, though. And I'm Haitian, so even crazier that I have, are kind of on this panel with another Haitian woman from Brockton in the cannabis industry. And that kind of said something that, like, I feel like I kind of always have had a tie to plants and to plant medicine. And I didn't really realize it until I started trying it and started learning more about it. And 2016, I left Texas to move to California and didn't have no money, didn't have any sort of plan. and just kind of got odd jobs wherever I could. And I ended up getting a marketing job for a glass company, like a wholesale, like glass company that sells bongs and grinders and things. And I was the only woman there. I was the only woman of color. It was a very small company. And when I would go to cannabis events, when I would, you know, be in dispensaries and be in these cannabis spaces, I was usually the only Black woman there. And it was very interesting to me to have that experience and go into these rooms and look around and go, oh, it's just me in here that's like representing for Black women. So from there, I kind of just had that light bulb moment where I was like, how can I represent Black women in this space? How can I like use what I know and what I love to do and the knowledge that I have to be a good example of what a Black woman in this space looks like? I got my degree in journalism, so I immediately started writing about cannabis. That was my first kind of introduction to the space. And that transitioned to marketing, and then that transitioned to PR, and then that transitioned to branding and design. And I kind of took all the skills and all the things that I like doing and just made them
Oh, looks like Ayana froze a little bit, and that's okay for now. She'll come back from the tech world. I want to introduce Vanessa, who popped on here. Hi, welcome. I've read your bio for folks, but again, I'll just mention your incredible story of being the first Black woman to open a fully recreational dispensary on the East Coast, Legal Greens, located in Brockton, Massachusetts. You're also born in Brockton and opened a new dispensary in hopes to bring a positive impact to your community. So the first question that I asked both Todd and Ayana is, how would you describe the cannabis industry generally and in your state particularly? And then the second question that we're currently working on is, how did you get into the cannabis industry? So you can take whichever one of those that feel good, and then we'll go back to Todd.
Okay, so the industry in Massachusetts right now is very regulated. I'll say that. It's probably one of the most regulated in the state. There's a seed to sale, which means that it has to be tracked from the moment the product is a seed all the way to where the product is sold. So there's the metrics, there's tags. If you look behind me, everything has to be numbered. It's a lot, but I love it. I came into this industry because one, I knew how marijuana was affecting a lot of people, and two, how a lot of people in this industry do not look like me, and I wanted to make a stance on the industry. With us going through the process, a lot of people didn't think that we were going to make it or that we were going to open, and we actually were one of the first people to open in the city. And me opening made myself the first, obviously, like you said, the first Black woman to open in the East Coast as a recreational, fully recreational, which means medical opened in 2016. You had to have a $500,000 to open. And obviously we didn't have that. We didn't know anybody that had a $500,000 asset. So we had to wait until recreational came about. And when recreational came about, the state made their own social equity program, which I was able to apply, and I had priority to, once I put my application in the state, I was just going to jump to the front of the line, and my application will be reviewed throughout the whole process till I got commencement, and I'm able to do more businesses in Massachusetts with my social equity applicant certification. So, yes.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I know we got separated for a little bit. I'm going to ask Todd that question and then come back to see if there was anything you want to tie us in. So Todd, I mean, when I look at your bio, right, and you started in consumer, or you have extensive experience in consumer packaged goods, managing a $140 million business there. What led you to the cannabis industry?
Well, it's kind of, initially I was looking for something to do on my own, because being in leadership positions in like consumer goods companies, et cetera, there's a lot of companies that come in and purchase the companies, or they change management, and they're always looking at ways to reduce costs, just because they're constantly challenged with margins, and so they get rid of the higher level people. So I kind of got tired of going through that. I was working for a startup in Los Angeles. I had moved out there from Chicago, and that happened there again. So I'm like, what can I do on my own? And I started looking into businesses that I could run, and recruiting just kind of fit, because throughout my career I've always hired and trained people, and looked for good quality people to be on teams. And so that's what piqued my interest in recruiting. Global Recruiter Network, which is the franchise that I own, is one of 200 offices in the country. None of them were in the cannabis industry, and the cannabis industry really interested me because, one, I grew up in agriculture in Kansas, so I've always been familiar with growing plants, and always had gardens and vegetable gardens, etc. And I'm a big believer in natural healing. I'm not saying I'm anti-pharma, but I believe in taking a natural approach first, and so it just kind of blended together. It was a little bit crazy at first, because I had, people are like, why would you get into the GRN people that own 200 offices were like, nobody was doing cannabis. So I thought I was a little crazy. And, then I had to talk with my family, because, I felt like my mother's 80 years old. And I felt like when I told her I felt like I was 16 again in the kitchen getting the gateway drug lecture. But she didn't. She surprised me. She was like, oh, I've been doing a lot of reading. There's a lot of benefits to it. So reaching a lot of audiences. So anyway, that's kind of a long explanation, but that's how I got into it, and I really enjoy it. I love, the industry. I think it's very interesting, and a lot of people in it, really good quality people that are looking to help others, and they just want to, do something beneficial.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Ayana, we got cut off when you were just talking about what got you into the cannabis industry, and if there was anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where I was cut off. I don't know how much you guys heard.
Right. You were talking about, again, how when you started, you got a journalism degree, and then you were working with a small business, and you noticed that you were the only Black woman, the only woman sometimes even in these spaces. And
okay. I can follow from there. Okay, yeah. Well, I was always surprised by being the only Black woman in these spaces. This was in California in 2016. It was only medical. It wasn't recreational yet. So it's still very limited to like who could enter, a lot of gatekeeping. And from there, I built Kush and Q. I created a CBD skincare brand in my grandmother's backyard. And it kind of has been way bigger than I ever thought it would be. But I think it was that because I was someone that didn't look like everyone else in this space. I was creating something that was for women of color. I was very intentional about like the branding and the marketing, and including Black women on Instagram smoking weed, and including Black women holding, a joint. And I don't want to say my brand was one of the first to do it, but I think I was one of the first in the space that I was in to do it. And it was just very refreshing to everyone. So I just took what I, kind of learned from there. And now I've been doing cannabis marketing for 5 years, and I primarily work with women-owned and Black-owned CBD and cannabis businesses, and teach them the same things that I've taught myself, so they can be successful and actually connect with people that look like them in this industry.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Something that I'm finding as I'm meeting each of you is that it's really amazing to have the three of you sitting here with different perspectives and different entry points into the cannabis industry, right? So Todd coming from a recruiter standpoint, working with lots of businesses all over the country, and Anna working through marketing and a small business owner, and Vanessa having a kind of brick and mortar, like being solid in the community. I think it's really incredible to kind of have all of your perspectives on what the industry is. And so one of our viewers asked the question if we can talk more about, Vanessa was talking about the barriers to entry to opening a medical dispensary, just the $500,000 that it takes to open something. And our viewer asked the question if we can talk about how that alone can limit access to people of color to the industry. And so I'd like to hear about that, Vanessa, from you in particular, but also what the experience has been for you, Todd, and you, Ayana, of getting into the industry, coming from your different backgrounds. So Vanessa, maybe Vanessa's not quite with us yet, but I think she heard the question. Oh, here you are. You're muted.
I realized
Okay. Now we
I'm
can
not.
hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, now we can hear you.
The entry to the barrier to entry. It's a lot. Us going through the process. Like I said, the Massachusetts made their own social equity program, and with that, they had their provisions for it, and a lot of people they had a lot of ideas, but more so not a lot of action towards it. And probably 6 months is when they started to start programs for it to have their social equity application be able to do classes to start a business, start a business plan, and how to go through the whole state process and the application. But by that time, when they started to do that, I had already indulged myself in the actual regulations to figure out how to put application in the state. As far as getting the host agreement, that was one of our biggest hurdles, because if you do not have a host agreement, it means a contract with the city to be allowed to sell or to do anything with marijuana, you won't be able to do an application with the state or complete an application with the state without that. And how the state regulated it, it was only the mayor or a city selectman, a town selectman, that was able to negotiate that regulation, or if the city created their own cannabis commission that dealt with host agreements. With my city, us just dealing with the mayor, and at first that time that mayor was not giving host agreements to people that look like me. He was giving host agreements to his campaign donors over the years that helped him be who he is at that time. Um, I had to voice my opinion and say that what he was doing wasn't fair and how social equity was supposed to be. That's what the state wanted, and he was not taking that into consideration. And unfortunately, he actually passed away. And when he passed away, another mayor came in, which was a city councilor. And once he became mayor, he strictly opened it for social equity and economic empowerment. And with him doing that, that's how I was able to negotiate a contract with the city to go to the state. So there's a
Wow.
lot of barriers, because yes, the state wants social equity, but they leave it up to cities and towns to make that decision. But in Massachusetts, there is a lot of mayors or city select that do not look like me, and a lot of suburbs were created when there was like that Boston busing and stuff. So it's like there's like low key racism in Massachusetts, but people don't want to like broadcast it. But without that host agreement, you're not able to get you're not able to get an application with the state, to complete an application with the state.
Wow. Yeah, that's a story. That's a lot. Thank you for sharing. Todd, I'm wondering if you can speak to any barriers of entry that you experienced kind of switching industries, and also if there are things that you wish you knew prior to starting in the industry.
There weren't really barriers for me. I wouldn't say as far as initially getting into it, other than having to come up with the money to get the business started, et cetera. The biggest issue for me in starting this kind of business, and especially since I was from outside the cannabis industry, is just making the connections and building, communicating with people, trying to get them to trust me to help them with their hiring needs. So a lot of it is, and they put us through training, to teach us how to do the recruiting and build your business, et cetera. Of course, I came into it like I did everything. I think, oh, I'm going to be great at this. It just requires a lot of hard work, and I can do it, and I'll beat these goals faster than everybody else. Well, that didn't happen. It took me just as long as I said it would. So it was a lot of building from scratch, and reaching out. And in this kind of business, they say it takes 6 to 7 touches before somebody will engage with you. Because people have more ways than ever to communicate nowadays, and they're worse at it than ever on the most part. So that was the biggest challenge, and it's a slow build, and you just have to be very determined to make it work. But it was very different because I went from a position of people reaching out to me because I was responsible for a large portion of their business. And so I would get like 300 emails a day on people needing things from me to complete silence. And so that was a big adjustment. So it's just building it from the ground up. And that was my biggest challenge. What would I have done differently in hindsight? I think that was your question, or something similar.
Yeah, or what you wish you knew.
I wish that I had known the amount. Well, if I knew the amount of time it was going to take to get it going, I may not have done it. But I'm glad I didn't know that, because now I really enjoy it. But knowing what I know now, I wish I had done it, maybe 4 or 5 years before, because I would be much further along. And that's probably the only thing, because it does take time. But that's probably the only thing that I would have done differently.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Ayana, I would love to hear more about any barriers to entry that you experienced, and also, what you wish you knew.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first, I just wanted to say I really admire Vanessa and the work that she's doing and the work that she did working for dispensaries. I know how much money that cost. And I mentioned to Naomi earlier, I'm also Haitian and I was born in Brockton, Massachusetts. So I know you had some other barriers you probably had to, go through as well. And seeing women like Vanessa build dispensaries and being the first Black woman to do something just absolutely inspires me so much. And when I saw there was a Black woman in Brockton who owned a dispensary, and then I saw she was on the same panel as me, I was really excited. So I just wanted to say hi to Vanessa. But yeah, some of the things that, oh man, I wish I knew that it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of patience. And you need to know kind of what you're doing, but no one really knows what they're doing. So it's a little tricky. In terms of barriers, the barriers that have faced have definitely been more on the legal and financial side, because the industry is so new. The laws are changing all the time, including how you are able to take payments as a cannabis business. So for me, having a CBD business, I learned that, in order to even sell CBD online, you see thousands of people selling CBD products, but I didn't know you had to get a certificate of analysis. I didn't know you had to find a bank that will accept CBD businesses. I didn't know that you had to get payment processors that will accept CBD businesses. I didn't know that websites will kick you off because they think you're selling drugs. I didn't know that payment processors will kick you off because they think you're selling drugs. And these are all things that I learned as they were happening, which was very frustrating, but it happens all the time to a lot of us, even now. Like, a lot of Instagram accounts in the cannabis space are being deactivated and being deleted, and we're seeing it all happen at the same time to a lot of like minority-owned pages, and we're all kind of learning at the same, like, okay, what did we say? What did we do? What can we post? What can we not post? And it's just little things like that. You can't approach the cannabis industry like any other industry. You cannot, absolutely. You have to be very mindful about what you say, what programs you're using, what websites you're using, what paperwork you have. Are you compliant? Are the things you're putting on the internet, on your website, compliant? Those are all things that matter, and those are definitely like hurdles that I had to understand as I was building. And I definitely wish I knew that before, because I've had many days where I quit. I don't want to do it. I quit, and I'm still here because I'm crazy. But it's definitely a challenge to do anything on the marketing side with cannabis, because you can't run ads. You can't say selling CBD. You can't say, I own a dispensary and we're having 15% off. You can't say things like that. You have to be creative and compliant at all times.
Wow. Yeah, y'all are all raising these like really juicy questions that I really am excited to hear more as we dig into it. I want to know more too about the way that your work is perceived in the community. Todd, you kind of spoke to it when you were introducing the idea to your mother. What do you think the stigmas are in in the Black community? Where are they coming from, and how do they impact your work? Let's start with Vanessa.
Well, I'll talk about we'll talk about this. With Massachusetts, it was first voted in 2015 to make it regulated and to make have recreational sales. So majority of people voted it, and that's why we have recreational sales right now. As far as Brockton, a lot of people were, kind of iffy, but they felt like it was needed in the city because the city needed a lot of money to allocate for roads, schools, and stuff like that, and like buildings that are dilapidated. And that's why I chose what I chose. And if you know Brockton, downtown area hasn't always been the best area. And now they're like starting to fix that area and build apartments, and we chose to be in that area as well. So with that, a lot of people were kind of skeptical of having the marijuana in that certain area, but we cleaned up that area. We cleaned up the building. If once you like go on Pleasant Street, it used to be like this red barbershop, laundromat building, but now it's like a real clean, sleek, modern building. And that alone, when I would like be in the city, a lot of people would say, "Oh wow, you cleaned up the area. Oh wow, you cleaned up the area." And that alone made people's minds change of the marijuana thing. And the fact that we're open, we don't have any issues so far, thank God. And that's changing people's minds. We're giving money to the state, to the city, and to the state. So people can't really complain about that. And then my parents, when I first told them about me going into the marijuana industry, my mom was definitely not for it. As the Haitian parents, they were like, no, this is drugs. Like, what are you doing? This is not your thing. You need to leave. But now that I'm open, my dad is actually like trying products, and my mom, I can have like conversations with her about marijuana and stuff. So it's different. And obviously they see that I'm open. A lot of people are talking to them about me being open and me being on the news and stuff like that. So they're proud. People, it's changing slowly but surely. I feel like marijuana won't be the gateway drug, but as more so like something that helps people with mental issues, drug addiction, and all that stuff. And then how we're benefiting. I mean, how we are actually doing an expungement clinic in our dispensary, probably like in 2 weeks, September 17th. And me being a criminal justice, I have a bachelor's in criminal justice, and what I want to do is change that stigma on that war of drugs, because I know that once people have that record on their they're not going to be able to get a job, or people are going to have that stigma against them because of what they have been charged for, even like a dismissed charge that still comes up on your record. So we want to bring that information to people that they can expunge their record, they could seal it, and here's other ways that you could do it, and we're giving that information for free. So we want to help the community. I want to help the community because a lot of people have been affected, and we're in Brockton, that is majority of Black city. So I have to help my people. If I don't, who will?
Wow, thank you. Yeah, Ayana, would you also like to speak to this?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what are some stigmas that you feel are around cannabis, and particularly within the Black community? Where do you think they come from, and how are they impacting your work?
I think the stigmas come from trauma, honestly. The stigmas definitely come from trauma from where I'm from. Like I said, I was born in Brockton. I wasn't there very long. And I grew up in Houston, Texas. And there are definitely a lot of people that I knew that got arrested for having very small amounts of weed, or had cousins that maybe had, an eighth, and they were just trying to sell the eighth so they can pay their bills. And now they're not, in their homes anymore. And it's very scary to just have this plant in your hand that'll get you locked up immediately. And this is kind of why I was like, I got to get the heck out of Texas, because I'm too cute to get arrested. I can't do it. Like, I love cannabis and I love telling people about it, but this is a very scary place to be in order to do it. It definitely comes from trauma and just fear. And I think that was obviously on purpose. If you go into the long history of the war on drugs, Black and brown people were targeted specifically. So you could have, that disproportionate number in the criminal justice system. And it still is impacting a lot of us today. And even if, you aren't someone who's been in jail, someone, like all of us, at least everyone that I know, knows someone who has somehow been affected by cannabis in a negative way, not even from the usage, but from how it was perceived by someone outside of them and them getting in trouble for it. And I'm always just my goal is always to be a positive representation for women of color who consume cannabis and who are in cannabis, because also as a Haitian woman, my family does smoke weed. Actually, a lot of my aunts and my uncles, they do smoke weed, but my dad is not super into it. Like, he just thinks it's a phase. He's like, oh, it's just a job, and doesn't really know that it's like my career and something I'm very passionate about. And that's still definitely a stigma that I think we have to fight through in order to like get kind of older generation to learn that, like, yes, they were impacted on the war on drugs. Yes, I totally understand why it's a little scary for them. But if you become, if this next generation becomes a positive representation of what cannabis can be and what it looks like and how it's being used and how we're talking about it, then the next generation will have a better understanding of it as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And Todd, how would you again, you spoke to the story a little bit in terms of approaching your mother with the idea of kind of moving to the cannabis industry, but can you say more about the stigmas around the industry and how they impact your work?
Yeah, I would say the stigmas are less than when I started a couple of years ago. I mean, it is changing, and it's changing somewhat rapidly, it seems. Most of it, I like everyone else, I agree that it comes from the war on drugs, and how, plus also the way people have been portrayed in movies, etc. It's always been kind of negative. I think people are starting to overcome that, and then you have the big. I grew up in a very religious household, coming from Kansas in the Midwest, and so a lot of that's probably where more of the pushback I've heard is, they think it's ungodly or sinful or whatever. And I'm kind of like, well, if you believe in God, how do you think the plant got here in the first place? Don't you think it was put here for a purpose? And you kind of have to do a lot of educating, explaining, and they'll say, well, the FDA hasn't approved it or whatever. And I'm like, you just kind of have to talk to people and explain, well, yes, but they approved opioids and look what's happened with that situation. So it's a lot of it's just, sharing logic with people. But as far as the stigma, I mean, it's like I said, it's lessened a lot. I had people that I used to work with or worked with for many years that thought I was crazy for doing it, and they didn't agree with it. But on the most part, most people are pretty receptive and know that the industry is growing. Even like when I talk to law enforcement officers, because I talk to some sometimes, and most of them are all for it too. They think it's been handled poorly in the past, and they're just more of people doing things legally, et cetera. But that's a different topic. But I think the stigma is lessening. At least it is, from my experience, from when I talk to people.
Cool. Todd, I'm wondering if you can begin us on the next question, which is, what do you think needs to be done, whether it's in terms of the government or nonprofits or just more education in terms of changing the stigma or helping to educate people? Do you think it's enough that people who are in the industry just kind of talk to people who are around them, or do you feel like there could be more work done on a governmental level or, in terms of nonprofits?
Well, as far as I think people need to be educated. My one thought is probably not a good thought. It's like remove all the politicians. It would probably make things much less complicated. But because I think a lot of them the politicians are so influenced by big pharma, et cetera, that I think that's a harder thing to move. And regardless of how they actually feel about it, personally, I think that some of them are afraid to speak out because they're afraid they'll lose, support from their donors, et cetera. I think it can start with, people just continually talking about it. I think it'll help when some of the advertising laws change, like Ayana talked about how difficult it is to advertise product. When some of that changes and people can see it more on a regular basis and be desensitized to the negativity of it and see it in a more positive light, that will only help over time, I think. And, and a lot of it too, and going back, I have kids that are teenagers, and even in school still, they address drug use, etc. But the way that they address it still, and this was when a couple of years ago when I lived in California, even then they were talking about, they call it weed, for instance, instead of calling it cannabis. Which there's a lot of negative stereotypes associated with the word weed, for the product. So they talk about it that way and make it seem just as dangerous as like heroin and some of these other drugs when it's completely different. So there you have the education portion of it too. Yes, I agree that children shouldn't be using it, but then they also should be explaining, just like alcohol, they explain how alcohol is bad, but that people that are adults can consume it. So if it's legal, they should be expressing that as well, rather than trying to drill it into kids' heads that it's just the same evil as like heroin or something.
Right. Thank you for that thought. Vanessa and I want to hear your thoughts as well on what work can be done to change people's perceptions. But we're getting some questions from our viewers, and I want to make time for those as well. So I'll start with Ayana. You can touch on this idea of what can be done, but we also have this new question that you can address, which is, what is the best way for an individual, just one person, to get involved in the cannabis industry with a small amount of money for a startup?
Ooh, that's a great question. So when I started my business, I had no money. I started my business with like $60. I went to Smart and Final, I bought some stuff and kind of just made it happen. I think in your mind, you think you need a lot to start, but you kind of don't, depending on what you're doing, depending on your budget. Like if you are trying to start like an ancillary business, really don't really need too much money to start that. It's usually a digital space, so you really need the money to just like host a domain, buy a website. For an actual physical business, I think for a cannabis business, now that I'm older and wiser, when I started my business, I didn't know what I was doing. I was 22. I guess I did it in my garage with like $75. But if I kind of did it over again, I would probably start with about $1,200-1,500 just to cover, the certifications and the legal fees alone. And that would at least give me a head start. So even if my business wasn't ready, I didn't have to worry about the legal aspects later, because I think it's so important, especially in this industry, to just know that you're legally okay and that you're being compliant with everything that you're doing.
Cool. Thank you. And Vanessa, I'm wondering if you can also touch on that, from coming from a perspective of starting a brick and mortar. What's the best way for an individual to get involved in the cannabis industry with a small amount of money for startup?
That is a great question. From us doing our retail, starting our retail till now, that was a 3-year process. So if someone doesn't have that time period, because it takes time to go, because there's money involved, but then there's not so much money involved, because it's more so politicking and paperwork and just time-wise, more so money-wise. If the person doesn't have funds to pay for a lawyer, I would say more so do it in-house and do it yourself, because that's what we did. We did it ourselves. As far as like a brick and mortar, if you don't have money to pay for rent, and I would say more so probably do like a delivery, because that's something that's coming up where it's more so all you need is an office and just getting one fleet of one car and then working your way to getting another car and another car, more so than just trying to do it Amazon and just get 50 cars. Start small. Even with like, probably if you want to do like a micro grow, which is a small grow, I would say finesse your way into probably not paying rent, because with us, we finessed our way where the person I still was using their building. It was a barbershop and a laundromat, and we didn't have to pay rent because they were still using it. But when it got to that certain point of where we had to start doing build out, that's where we started finessing our way into seeing how we could pay for everything else. But I would say work within your means. If you don't have a lot of money, there's ways where you can, like I said, finesse your way into getting to where you need to be, to where people can invest into your business, and then you'll be able to start your build out and really put the real work into it where money is needed. But finesse. There's ways to finesse.
I love that. I love that. I'm really hearing a lot about, I mean, I think about finesse in terms of relationships, right? Communication, like how are you getting what you need from the people who are around you, and using your means. Todd, I'm really curious to hear from your perspective as well, shifting into the industry and then also working to recruit people and train people in the industry. What would you say is the best way for an individual to get involved with a small amount of money for a startup?
It's kind of hard for me to speak to that because my startup's a little bit different in that it's not really, there's no difference in getting involved to it in what I do than it is in getting involved in like an IT recruiting firm. I can speak to how people can get involved in it if they want to, work in the cannabis industry, for a company. I mean, if you want me to.
Sure.
I mean, and a lot of that is just being persistent and figuring out the kind of role you want to have, because a lot of companies, like right now, even if you go on like Indeed or LinkedIn and look at jobs, I mean, there are tons of cannabis companies that are hiring salespeople. 2 years ago, they wanted people that only had cannabis sales experience. But now, as the industry has grown so fast, they need people from outside the industry. So if you wanted to get into sales, for instance, and you have sales skills, you want to, like on your resume and how you market yourself, it's all about building relationships and understanding sales cycles. But in the cannabis industry, you also have to show that you have knowledge of the industry. So some people I talk to, they're like, I really don't know anything about cannabis, but I want to get into cannabis sales. And I'm like, well, you're not going to get hired unless you know about the product, because people that are in the industry are very passionate about it, and they want people that are as well. So a lot of it, that can be just doing research, going to networking events like Women Grow or Canna Gatherer, or in Arizona, they have Marijuana Industry Trade Association meetings, which are networking meetings. And then also, like if you're employed and you have some extra time, go to work at a dispensary, and that's, I mean, people learn so much working in a dispensary, or, because you learn the benefits and the differences in products, et cetera. But then also you can work in cultivation. There's a lot of different ways. I mean, as far as, but you have to know what the product is and what it does. And, when you're talking to someone, if you do get an interview and they ask you why you're interested in the cannabis industry, the number one thing to not say is, I want to make money. Because people are, first and foremost, they don't want to hear that at first. Sure, everybody wants a job so they can earn a wage, but they want to know kind of what your skill set is and what you're passionate, why you're passionate about the cannabis industry. Because if you're passionate about it, then you're more likely to do well and help their company, rather than just being in it for, making a dollar.
Yeah. That's all really, really helpful and insightful, and I think brought together what Vanessa and Ayana were saying. So thank you, Todd. We have just a few minutes here for a question from the viewers, and we have another one that says, what are some of the future positive projections for growth that y'all are observing in the cannabis industry? And I'd like to start with Ayana. How do you see the cannabis industry growing, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I definitely see more diversity, which is great. I'm not the only Black woman in the room anymore. I love it. And I definitely see the industry actually taking its time more when they're developing policies, which I really appreciate, because as we've seen, you can legalize a state, you can make a product available, but if the state doesn't actually give back to the community that kind of wanted the cannabis or doesn't give back to the community that has been most affected by the war on drugs, then people are going to be really upset. And the industry is starting to realize that it's really important to address that, because you cannot, or I personally cannot, just because I'm a woman of color, you cannot have a conversation about cannabis and leave out race. And you cannot say, I just like to smoke weed, I don't see color, I don't know what race is. Like, I've definitely had some interesting, like, because I do marketing, I get some interesting comments and DMs sometimes, people being like, don't talk about race on this page. I'm like, but this is a Black-owned business in cannabis. Like, what do you mean? But now I'm seeing that people are more so asking, like, hey, I'm a consumer. Where can I go find more Black-owned cannabis brands? Or like, what brands are part of the social equity grants? Or what brands do you like that are Black-owned that I can support? And I really appreciate that consumers and the industry, behind the people other than the consumers, the actual like professionals, are actually taking time to say, okay, we need to actually like talk about this and include people of color in this conversation in this industry, because it's long overdue, long overdue.
Yeah, thank you. Vanessa, what would you like to add in terms of, from your perspective, what are some of the future positive projections for growth in the cannabis industry? How is it growing, and where do you see it going?
I actually see it going to where it could actually be federally decriminalized. And then with that, I know a lot of people don't want like the Amazons and like the Newports to come in, but like I see it to where we could probably bring in probably third world countries where they could strictly, because they're the ones that were growing the cocaine and the fentanyl and all that stuff. And we could switch it around to where they could just grow marijuana. And with that, they could legally import it to any other country, and they could make sort of like revenue. And that's how I would love to see it. I don't know if that would really happen, but that's my plan. That's how I see it in my mind.
That's a perspective I have not heard before. So thank you so much for sharing that vision. I mean, even for just folks in the audience who aren't in the cannabis industry or who are thinking about it, it kind of allows them to insert their imagination to see where then they can get involved. So I think that that's really incredible. Exactly. And Todd, I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the ways you see the cannabis industry growing, and what are some positive projections that you're seeing as it moves forward?
Well, it's growing on so many fronts, as far as, and how people get into it. I mean, there's a lot of companies that, some of them just sell flour, some sell flour and edibles. I see the beverage section is a very small portion of it right now. And I know there are several companies that are working on developing beverage products for the space, especially in California. But I mean, it's just going to continue to grow. I mean, as far as people wanting to get into the industry, there's also, I know we're talking about cannabis, but there's also the hemp side of it. So if people are more industrial minded, or, they're more into like green initiatives, I mean, there's a lot of work being done with like hemp also, that where they're coming up with building products and plastic substitutes and things like that. So if you're a culinary person, there's room for people. If you're into industry, there's room for people, and they need people that are smart and want to work hard. So it's just a matter of finding the niche that you're looking for and helping the industry grow. And I will say that I talk to people all over the country. So if anybody wants advice, or needs feedback or whatever, I'm always looking for quality people to market to companies that are looking for jobs. I mean, I look for people, but then people can also reach out to me if if you're looking for a position and they want to get into the industry and just either need advice or want help. I'm more than open to that.
Beautiful, thank you. We have one more question, and then we'll move to closing statements. So our question is, are there any scams within the industry that people should be aware of if they want to enter the industry? I'm also hearing, like, what are some red flags that maybe have come up for you along the way where you're like, I'm not gonna work with you or anything. Yeah, what have you seen, and what kind of things would you give to folks to beware of as they enter the industry? I'd like to hear from you, Vanessa. What has come up for you?
A lot. I would say one, consultants are not really that great of consultants. I would say more so figure it out yourself, because the regulations are there for a reason, and it's reading it and understanding it. If it takes 15 times to read it, if it takes 20 times to read it, because there's some people that will say, yes, they'll help you, yes, they'll do this, yes, they'll do that, but you're not their focus, and they're just going to take your money and give you a dream, but not really put action on that dream. And then there was this whole debacle with big companies trying to buy social equity, give them money so they could start their business, whatever the case may be, and give them product, but they would get a certain percentage off that business, and you had to have a certain percentage of their product on that shelf. If that product sells, if that product doesn't sell, that's not their problem. You're still going to have to pay them because they gave you money. And that was a big issue within the state. I was even approached on it. I read the contract and I was just like, this is not what I want to do. I want to figure out myself, because I know that me and my team, we're able to do this, and we took the time, the effort, the blood, sweat, and tears to make our dream a reality. So it's definitely possible. There's definitely going to be people that are going to give you false information, that are going to tell you lies about regulations, knowing that they know that it's a lie. And it's crazy. It's stay focused, tunnel vision, and you'll get to where you need to go.
Cool, thank you. We have just a few more minutes for this question, but Ayana, I'm wondering if you can speak to any scams that have come up or red flags that you would like to share for people to be aware of as they enter.
Yeah, I think two red flags that immediately popped in my head was, one, don't work with people who aren't invested and as passionate as you. You kind of have to be a little crazy to work in this industry. And a lot of people are going to enter this industry that just want the money. And that's great. Like, everyone needs a job. But if you're going to quickly find out, if you're working with someone who just wants it for the money, they're not going to actually want to do the really hefty lifting and do the really hard work, because there are going to be days where you have to do some really hard work and it's not fun, and you're not smoking weed, and you can't smoke weed all day because you have 5,000 things to do and you cannot get them done until midnight. You're going to have those days. So you definitely, keep an eye out for who you work with and make sure that they're equally as passionate as you. And if you work with someone, I work with clients, I'm a freelancer, so I work with clients one-on-one a lot. If you work with someone and you realize they're not a good fit, just cut that tie. It's totally okay. You want to be very mindful about who you work with, because everyone's industry is learning at the same time. And then my second red flag is also make sure you work with people who have the same values as you in the industry, especially because the majority of the industry is still not owned by people of color. Most of my bosses for the dispensaries that I've worked for were white men that had no cannabis experience. They just had the money, and they were terrible people, and I hated it. And now I don't work with people like that anymore. I only work with people that share the same values as me in this space, because this space has kind of, that line in the sand where there's ethics versus profit. And some people are willing to cross that line, but I'm not. So I just choose not to work with people like that. And you shouldn't either if you have ethics and have certain values as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Todd, what are some scams or red flags folks should look out for? We have just a few seconds before we have to go around and close.
Sure. Building upon what Vanessa and Ayana said, it's really, I would say, do your research, because there are people in the space that do not operate with integrity. And most of the time, the nice thing about the cannabis community is people talk and they communicate around. If you have a bad experience, people will tell you, they'll make it known. So if you're going to interview with a company, do your research, because there are people that have had really terrible experiences with people that don't share the same values, like what was just addressed, and they're out for the money, they're in it for themselves, and they've kind of screwed people over. So you just kind of have to keep an eye out for that.
Awesome. Thank you. And in our last 30 seconds, I'm wondering if y'all can go around and share with everyone how they can stay in contact with you, how they can support your work. Vanessa?
We have an Instagram page. We have a Facebook page, Legal Greens. And then I have an Instagram page, VANESSA at 90. And if anybody wants information, or they could always email us at info@legalgreens. And we do informations. We do thanks, Mark. We do, sorry. We've done videos on how to start a marijuana company and stuff like that. So if anybody ever wants information, they could always email us at info@legalgreens. Thanks.
Thank you. And Ayana, how can folks stay in contact with you and support you?
You can find me at the Marijuana Ayana, and my website is MJI Canna Marketing.
Beautiful. And Todd, how can folks stay in contact with you?
I'm on LinkedIn a lot, but it's Global Recruiters of Scottsdale. And my name's Todd Scott, like it's listed. It's about as simple as you can get. Not saying that I am, but that's the way. Just reach out anytime. And tscott@grnscottsdale is my email address. So I'd be happy to talk with anyone.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for participating in this panel, sharing your knowledge, sharing your energy. And thanks to all the viewers for being here. We're at our hour, and I want to honor that so folks can get to the next panels. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Like, do you even know who you are? Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Gave you something, you wouldn't know you want it. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, hi.
Hello, I'm hoping everyone can hear me well. We are here today to have our discussion about mental health stigmas and as they relate to finances in the African American community. My name is Carla McDay. I'm a mental health therapist, licensed independent social worker. I work in Akron, Ohio at Minority Behavioral Health Group. We are the only Black-owned, nationally accredited agency approved to do interventions that are African-centered. We work from a model developed by Dr. Linda James Myers from the Columbus, Ohio State University. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. They are Dr. Neighbors, and Dr. Harold Neighbors is an applied social psychologist with a methodological background in survey research. And I'm going to allow him to introduce himself momentarily. He'll be followed right after by Amari Aarons. Amari has worked in Fortune 150 companies his entire career as a disruptive leader and transformative coach. So I will allow you all to introduce yourselves.
Okay, thank you. Just by way of a brief introduction, my name is Dr. Neighbors, and I've been doing research in a university setting for my entire career. So I'll be speaking to everyone today from the perspective of someone who has been collecting data for quite a while, for the last 10 to 12 years, focusing on Black men. I don't have any clinical training per se, but all of my collaborators have been clinically trained mental health therapists. I really don't believe you can do good research without collaboration. With somebody coming from the clinical perspective. So I hope to share with you today some of the things we've learned from our studies. I'll say I was trained at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. You can probably see that Block M back there. So I'm a Wolverine. Right now I'm working at Tulane University in the School of Public Health. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mr. Ahrens.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Carla, Dr. Neighbors. Good to be with both of you on this panel, and good to see everyone in the audience. I'm Omari Ahrens. I'm the founder and managing partner of the Ahrens Group, which is a diversity inclusion workplace consulting firm that I founded after working for over 15 years in corporate America. And here representing Black executive men, which is a group that really focuses on helping Black men in particular who have experiences in corporate America be happy, whole, and healthy on this pathway to inner peace. And I'm speaking from my own experience, both as a human resources manager, director, and then executive in corporate America for 8 of the 15 years there. My clinical experience and counseling training as a chaplain and as a licensed minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So really glad to be with you today.
Wonderful. Thank you to you both. I'm going to open us up with the umbrella question. And here it is. I'd like for you both to respond, and we'll just keep the format with Dr. Neighbors first, followed by Amari, if that's okay. How are some ways, or what are some ways, mental health stigmas show up in the African American community or in the Black community?
Yeah, so I think I'll just mention one word to start us off, and that word is silence. Silence. The stigma, unfortunately, the stigma attached with, whatever it is that we mean by mental health, and our studies show that Black folks have a lot to say about mental health, but we also start to think almost immediately about mental illness when somebody says mental health. So there are some issues with that, but I'll say the word silence because the stigma that is associated with mental health, mental illness, mental disorders, psychological distress influences people to stop talking to each other, influences Black people especially to stop talking to each other about what we call in my program the truth. We say to Black men, can you muster up enough courage to tell the truth? Because if you can do that, you'll be able to start a dialogue, which I think everybody on this panel understands that it's that dialogue, that exchange of information around whatever the issues are, is the pathway to feeling better, getting better. So that'll be my opening statement, and I'd be happy to elaborate as we move along, but I don't want to dominate the microphone. So stigma is a major issue we have to deal with.
Okay.
Absolutely, and Dr. Neighbors, I think you opened us up with really what the core issue is around silence, right? It's that we have not created spaces within the Black community specifically for us to talk about the stigma around mental health and for us to really address the issues that we are experiencing. And I'll say, as the minister here in this group, that particularly given the importance of the Black church within our communities, from the civil rights before and after, the civil rights movement, I should say, before and after. The church has also been guilty of not providing these spaces and really saying to people, you know, you just pray about it, it'll go away. God can handle it. And yes, I absolutely believe that God can handle it, but God has also given us therapists and licensed clinicians, and He's given us people here on this earth that we can talk to about what's going on with us. I would add that the notion of vulnerability and masculinity, the Superman and Superwoman complex that we have, that the resilience that is in our DNA as Black people for all the things that we have survived, sometimes makes us believe that the things that we are experiencing are perhaps too small. Perhaps they are first world problems. Perhaps it's really not all that big of a deal. We sometimes experience issues of depression and anxiety in environments that look really great, in situations that on paper are exactly what it is that we've been praying for and asking for and working for. Especially when we enter corporate America with our degrees and graduating from these research one institutions, and we're making six-figure salaries and better, and we have perhaps not the corner office, but sitting close to the corner office in our organizations. You know, these are not environments that people where we're from, many in our family might be familiar with, and on the outside it looks really, really great. And so I think we also really struggle with this notion of, it seems like I have everything that I wanted on my list. You know, I have the car, the family situation looks nice, the house looks nice, the job looks nice, the salary and the bank account look nice, but yet I'm still experiencing these things. Shouldn't I just be happy for the lifestyle that I'm living, that I've worked for, that I've been blessed with? And so there's a guilt that comes there as well, that we're not as comfortable talking about and opening up with our friends, particularly if our friends have not achieved the same level of success that we have, or it also looks like our friends have it going on. And so if they're managing it and they're managing it well, and we're not, there's something wrong with us, is the belief that gets reinforced, why we don't open up and really talk about how we're feeling, how we're doing.
If I may just elaborate a little bit on those excellent points from Mr. Ahrens. So the first thing I want to say is just picking up on your last point, looks are definitely deceiving. You know, I mean, if all we know about anyone is what we can see, then we don't know very much. And this is why I'm really pushing dialogue and conversation. A lot of us look like we have it going on. And in fact, a lot of us have been successful, but you are absolutely right. That doesn't shield us from the stresses and strains of life. Now later on, I think we're going to talk about income and wealth and money. So there are some more things to say about that. But I also wanted to comment on something you said as the pastor in the group, and prayer. And so I do want to mention that our studies show that when Black people are under serious stress, prayer is a very, very important coping strategy. I mean, our data show that people will pray over it. But I want to underscore what you said. That does not mean you don't do other things. It doesn't mean that you cut yourself off and isolate from your family, friends, and sometimes from mental health professionals. I mean, those things are not mutually exclusive. That's a message that we need to get out. And I think, you know, I mean, that's essentially what I heard you say. And I just wanted to mention that our data back you up 100%. The third thing I'll say very briefly to pick up on an earlier comment, and that is this concept of masculinity. You know, that the way, you know, I'm in my 60s, so I was raised, you know, by a very traditional Black man about what it meant to be, quote, you know, show masculinity. And the way I've started to frame it now is I've called it tough guy syndrome. Like, I was raised to be a tough guy, and that means like you don't show your emotions. And it means if you are having a problem, you're almost suffering in silence. And you're trying to be a tough guy by showing that you can handle all your business no matter what. And I'm here to say that that is a bad mental health strategy. I hope everybody who hears me, that's a bad mental health strategy. Black men, unfortunately, we have a tendency to cut ourselves off from others precisely at the time when we need the help of others the most. So I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you both. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask another question. And Mr. Ahrens, based on your last response, I'd like for you to lead this time. This question, and it has a lot to do with your comments regarding the corner office. Now, I'm not on the panel, but I'm itching to be at this point. The question is this: what are some stigmas around money? But also I'm going to blend it with the second question, and that is, can someone's social economic status impact their mental health? Yes, let's talk about money and mental health together.
Yes. Well, I think quite simply, and by the way, you're absolutely on the panel, so we want to hear your perspective too.
You're on the panel now.
Jump right on in. The answer is yes and yes, right? Mental health and money and economic status certainly are all blended together, and there are several examples that we can look at to see how that is. I would go back. There was a study done in 1998 that led to the creation of the ACEs index, which studies incidents of childhood trauma that people carry with them. And so could be that your parents separated, could be actual physical violence or sexual assault. There's a number of items and several variations of this ACEs score worksheet assessment, but it manages all the types of trauma that people carry with them. And the way that sometimes can show up for us as adults, we see it particularly well in children, in the way that all of a sudden there's a student in a classroom who doesn't have really good relationships with anyone else, who's very withdrawn and sits in the corner, or acts out in really inappropriate ways. And when teachers, and my mother just recently retired after 35 years in education. So when teachers dig into what's really going on in the situation and the administrators get involved and social workers get involved, we often see trauma being part of why this child is acting out in the way that they do. Those traumas just don't disappear for us as we become adults, particularly when we've not gone through therapy and worked through them. And so you come into a situation in corporate America in the corner office, and you find out that you are the lowest paid person on the team. Everybody else is making $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 more than you. And you start to look at that as an assessment of your worth. As we think about toxic masculinity, and we see continually the way that Black women are achieving education degrees at a higher rate than Black men. And so Black man and Black woman get married. Black woman is making more, is becoming the breadwinner in the household. And that leads to questions for the man about, being the provider for the house and the role that he's supposed to have, particularly those of us that have been raised with fathers. My dad was an Army guy, who had certain standards about the way that we should be leading our households and the way that we should be showing up, right? And so our presence, the dollar sign that is attached to our year-end performance review and evaluation, absolutely sometimes gets conflated with our sense of self-worth. And that's why we have to do the work. That's why we have to understand that our worth is not a dollar amount. And I can tell you, I'm in my mid-30s, the dollar amount at the end of the day at the end of my performance review was never a great assessment of the value that I brought to any of the organizations that I worked for. It was drastically lower. And so if I allowed myself to really get caught up, and I did for a time, get really caught up in the race of who out of my peers could make it to six figures first, who was going to get promoted to the title, who was going to get the job where we were traveling to represent the company, right? Like all of those kind of trappings of success that we were after. And I found when I got there that it didn't take away from the anxiety, it didn't take away from the loneliness of being the only one or one of the few in the office and in the company, right? And so all of those other things were still true. And even though the economic success had come and the positional success had come and the influential success had come, I was still feeling odd man out and couldn't figure out why until I really started talking to some other people and building a community to find out I wasn't by myself.
And,
So
and when you started doing the work, I'll only add this comment that our intrinsic self-worth is what we need to focus on. And we have to realize that if you don't realize your self-worth is intrinsic and have that value, then when the things go, so does your self-worth. And you have to be careful to monitor that. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Neighbors.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a very complicated situation. I'll try to, give my perspective on it. It's a little different, but it's not inconsistent. So the first thing I'll say is that, again, I'm coming at this from a perspective that because of the research I've done, we sort of take 2 or 3 steps back in survey research and we try to paint a broad picture. So there are certain themes that we see, but the themes are not universal. They're general. So the first thing I'll say is that when we look at the relationship between what we sometimes call a socioeconomic position, which is typically income, education, occupation, and then later I'm going to say a little bit about wealth. But when we look at that big picture, there's no doubt that it's better to have more money than no money. I'll put it that way. When you are financially insecure, and I can see your smiles because I'm right.
I agree with that.
If you want to be stressed out, be in that situation where you can't make it to the end of the month and pay your bills and that kind of thing. So the first point I want to make is that there's good reason for us to be striving for financial success because it is extremely stressful to not have enough money. And in fact, one of my big disappointments with the United States is that we still have people living at or below poverty. Personally, it just makes no sense to me that in this country, with all the resources we have, that we have people who don't have enough money. But that's a societal problem. It's not, our problem per se. But chronic poverty is bad for your health, and it's definitely bad for your mental health because it's very, very stressful. So when you look at population health statistics, those of us who've been able to move up that socioeconomic ladder tend to have better health, better mental health in comparison to folks who haven't been as fortunate. So that's one point. But like I said, these are general themes. So no matter where you go up and down that socioeconomic ladder, you will find people who are experiencing at different points in their lives, what we might call distress. And maybe even that distress goes over into things like depression. So nobody is, immune from the emotional turmoil that comes from trying to make it. The third thing I'll say is that my research shows that one of the things that's really the most painful for us is the discrepancy between our aspirations and our achievement. So stay with me just a little bit. So you can be anywhere on this socioeconomic ladder, low, middle, high. But if your achievements are not quite matching your dreams, that is painful. I mean, we show that. That is very painful. And so I think this is part of what accounts for some of the things that Mr. Aarons was talking about, in terms of a lot of us are just grinding, working incessantly, trying to make it. Sometimes we are, trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, but very often we're also trying to achieve something that we set out for ourselves. Now, I'm going to stop there, but the big question is, well, why are we not always achieving what we dream for? And that's where the conversations start to veer into the unequal opportunities that are out there for Black folks, structural barriers that can hold us back. So I'll just stop there.
Okay, yes, Amar.
Yeah, I just want to I think two things. One, completely, and Dr. Neighbor, I think we need a whole session for you just to present out your research, because
I don't know about that, but
I am dying to hear it. So we're definitely going to connect. My mother told me and my brothers when we were younger that you can live life with money or you can live life without money, but that struggles come either way.
Yeah.
Right. And particularly as we think about the system of racism and white supremacy that we live in. Too often this summer, I was doing my clinical rotation at Boston Medical Center as a chaplain and working with a variety of patients, some of whom, not unlike us, Black people who had degrees, who were in stable situations, stable housing, employed, health insurance, right? And yet we're still caught in some of these systems of inequity that would show up. Black maternal morbidity, as an example, right? Health risk for Black women giving birth and the risk associated with that, excessive bleeding, fetal demise, like all of these things, right? And seeing people who were doing all the right things, as you just said, Dr. Neighbors, right? The aspiration that they had set for themselves and the work that they were doing still was not enough for them to be able to escape the system of inequity that is built around racism and white supremacy. And so we know that money is absolutely a solution, and it's an indicator of, and I should say it's not necessarily a solution, but it's an indicator of us being able to live a better, healthier, longer life, right? Because there are things that money gives us access to in terms of regular health care, in terms of neighborhoods to live in where there's cleaner air, right? Like all of these things that are economically driven. The other thing that I would say about dollars for us is that Black people tend to be more communal. And so many of us were raised with the adage of, as you climb the ladder, you've got one hand on the rung above you, so you're holding on for dear life and looking to go up. And you've got one hand kind of below and behind you looking to pull everybody else up in the family. And so many of us also are parts of our salary, not just supporting ourselves, but are supporting other family members, people who come to us, particularly first generation, second generation, college grads, first in our families or second generation in our families to hold professional jobs. My parents and my aunts, all professionals, they were all first generation in their family to go to college. But I'm the first generation in our family, and right now the only one that is in corporate America, which is a whole different set of expectations and workplace environment, right? So I got to the point where my parents were like, all we can do is pray for you. We don't really know what it is that you are experiencing in the environment where you are. But so many of us, I find my peers in corporate America are not just working and trying to climb the corporate ladder for themselves, for them to have something, but really that they are, in fact, lifting up their entire family and in many ways lifting up their entire communities with their salary and with the benefits that they are negotiating for. So there is this, there's an additional pressure that I think it comes to us when we talk about money and Black people having financial success, that it's not just about our own selfishness of being able to get the latest bag, the nicest car, the newest game system, but it's that we want to be able to live well, and we are also in some ways obligated to and responsible for helping our family and our broader community to live well also.
Just to
That is
elaborate,
so very true.
Yeah, just very quickly, I want to say that the way I was raised by my dad, especially, was to get a job and keep a job. Don't screw it up. Don't get fired. Like, just work. And so that's one of the problems we face in the Black community. Not everyone has a job. So chronic unemployment or even underemployment or part-time work. So that's one thing. Having a job gives you benefits. Sometimes I think the health benefits are almost better than the salary, because if you're trying to take care of your health and mental health, that means you need to access services. And services, mental health services are not cheap. But if you have an employer who's subsidizing that, and all we have to do is read the paper and look at the tremendous variability in what we are charged across the nation, depending on where we are for the same services. So that's one issue, that we have to push. And right now, this really comes under the banner of social determinants of mental health. So employment, unemployment, income and wealth, poverty, these are social determinants that we really need to address. The second thing I want to make just very briefly is the distinction between income and wealth. So what I learned growing up is my lucky break was I was the child of two people who were working. They both had jobs. So we had income. What I learned later in life was that we didn't have wealth. In other words, we couldn't save money, but we were able to use the money that they were making to live what I call a very good life. So when I think about your question, one of the things I think about is how we get Black folks, more of us, in a position where we can build wealth in addition to income, because wealth is a very good safety net. If something goes wrong and let's say you lose your job, okay, now you have a serious problem. You're probably going to get another job at some point, but until that happens, you've got a problem. And we saw this happening in the pandemic, big time. So if we can build wealth is there to help us through some of those tough financial times. So I think one of the distinctions we need to think about is income versus wealth. Now, because of what you mentioned, enslavement, racism, and white supremacy, because you can't talk about racism without talking about the hierarchy. And the hierarchy they put in place was very clear that white people were at the top. So because of all of that, we're still paying for that today. And this is one of the reasons why we don't have the wealth we deserve to have. These are the things that are driving the disparities that we're all upset about. And these are the things that are causing us to get sick at disproportionate rates in comparison to other groups. So I'll just say amen to everything.
Okay, I have another question. I'm going to interject some comments prior to sort of switching gears just a little bit. I'd just like to say that I talked a little bit about this African-centered psychology. It really stems from bringing people back to our values. We are a people who have survived the Middle Passage, slavery, Jim Crow, now Jim Crow 2.0, and these new ways that people have had to kind of keep us down. One of the things Amari talked about, there are 6 principles to this psychology psychology that are important to us as a people. And one of them you just talked about was extended self-identity. It is never just about you. We always have to have this communal perspective and bring others along with us. So I'm glad you brought that up. Another one we talked about was spirituality, how our spirituality has always helped us to get through. So in my day-to-day practice, I work in a clinic and most of our clients are impoverished and inner city people. So sometimes there are these disparities, and there's also this this imbalance that does not permit them to sort of ascend the ladder, if you will. We got a ladder with slanted steps sometimes, and so it's difficult for us through structural racism to rise. So to talk to them about getting back to these values, because I want you to realize that these values are what really sustained our ancestors, and we can't forget about those things. So I just wanted to throw that in. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, do you think there's an impact on mental health by not talking about finances within the home? Within our families, within workplaces? Do you think that that contributes to our dysfunction?
I'll let Mr. Aarons take that one.
Well, I'm happy to start us off, and
yeah.
Again, the answer is absolutely yes.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I would say, I'm a big believer. I think one of my superpowers is helping people negotiate their salaries. So I love the behind the scenes conversations. I love running. I'm not really a math guy, but I love running the analysis of cost of living in the city where you are and where you would be moving to if you took this new role. I love talking to people about if you stayed at your current company, what is the level that you would be next in line for, and what does that level pay, and helping them really kind of think through the decision that they're going to make about whether they stay or they leave or how they negotiate an offer. I think we don't have enough people to talk to about that, and we don't talk as openly about it, right? Now, I say that, and I say that with the caveat of I'm not about telling everybody my business, right? So I'm not necessarily trying to post my salary and my bonus amount and my 401k and everything. It's not going to go up on my Facebook or my Twitter, so don't follow me there if you're looking for that. But if you are in a situation and you're trying to understand, I had a young man from my church that I knew who was signing up for some papers with his first job in corporate America right when he graduated. Incredibly proud of him. His parents couldn't help him understand like all these options and the Series 2030 fund versus the Series 2050 fund and long term, because they didn't have any of that. They didn't have any of those benefits. So I opened up my 401k and all of my page so he could actually see the performance over time. This is what you're looking for, right? But I'm not doing that for everybody. I'm doing that for people who need that. That's not information I'm just posting. So I think you have to have relationships with people and identify the people in your network who are a little bit above you, who might know a little bit more than you do, who can help you explore different areas. My friends and I talk money, and not in the sense of trying to compete with each other, but each of us, one of my friends, when he got promoted, was the first one to get long-term incentives. We had no idea what that was, right? And so when I was negotiating my job offer, and I went in going, all right, here's the number that I want that they need to meet. Here's the bonus amount that I want to meet. Here's the number of vacation days that I want to be able to have at this company. I didn't understand that that was the basic stuff. And so when I got the job offer, the number was better than the one that I was expecting. The vacation days were more than I was expecting. The bonus amount was more than I was expecting. And if I hadn't had the conversation with my friends and if I hadn't had mentors, I would have probably just said yes to that offer and I would have left money on the table, right? And so you have to be able to be in conversation with people who can help you navigate that next level. Now, and I say that in the sense of just be nosy, going after people and saying, how much do you make and that sort of thing. But it is an open conversation that you should have in the sense of when you can help people, right? So it's not posting it on Facebook to brag about it, but it's being in relationship with people so that you can understand what it is that you're leaving on the table and that you have the skill for negotiation. one of the things we see, and I'll say specifically, it happens for Black men, but particularly for Black women. And I say this from my HR experience. The imposter syndrome showing up in salary negotiations is a very real thing. We've been taught in some ways to just be grateful for what it is that we're offered. And I don't see people successfully negotiate. I also have seen it. I've managed supplier diversity. And I look at Black vendors when we come to the table talking to corporate America and the prices we offer. I'm guilty of this as a independent consultant now. Sometimes I'm like, ooh, I think it really should cost this much, but I don't know that they'll pay me that, right? We all have these thoughts. But I can tell you from my days managing supplier diversity that white people don't have any problem asking for $25,000 when they just have a bachelor's degree. They don't have any clinical training. They don't have, books that they've written, right, necessarily. They come right out and they feel very comfortable and very confident speaking for themselves. We come in the room with all the credentials, with all the setup, with having invested in all the materials in the way that we can, and feel guilty about charging really what it is that we're worth for what it is that we're being asked to do. It's something I'm literally struggling with now, right? And I'm like, I know better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? All this experience I have from corporate America and helping people negotiate salaries, and it still catches up with me, right? And so these are ways in which it's deeply embedded in our community. Fortunately, I have people to talk to about it, right? And being able to talk to people and say, here's what they're asking me to do, right? Like other people who are consulting, I have some mentors who are doing this, who said, listen, I'll share some things with you so that you can get set up and that you can be successful. I'm gonna introduce you to some people so that you can get successful. And I'm able to have the behind the scenes conversations to say, here's what I think I should charge. Here's what they're asking for. And they say, why are you charging that? Like, you need to come on up. And I've also had times where my mentors have said to me, yeah, that's way too much. You don't have the credentials for that yet. That'll come in a couple of years, right? But you need people that you can have the honest, authentic conversations with who are going to give you the reality check about your current situation. Otherwise, you're floating out here. If you Google all these things, you're going to get 25 different processes and validations and charts to tell you how to do these things. You need to talk to people you trust and people that you have relationships with. So look around in your circle, see who are the people that you can talk to if you're not talking to someone now. And if you're looking around your circle and you're going, I don't have anybody that I think I can talk to, reach out. I'm happy. I've got a very wide network of people who are very open. And so reach out to some people that you think maybe, I don't know if that person would talk to me. They probably would, but reach out to some other people who can connect you to some people so you can have some real conversations.
I like that a lot. Okay.
So if I can just tell, one brief story just to reinforce what we just heard, and I'll use myself as the vehicle for this. I had to, so the word that comes up when I listen to Mr. Ahrens talk about the importance of, getting mentoring, the word that comes up for me is humility. So a person has to be humble enough to accept the fact that they don't know everything. So in my case, as a young man, I was grossly misinformed because I actually thought I knew everything I needed to know, which is just, being young and stupid. So when I got my first job, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to negotiate. And I thought I was actually doing something because I did negotiate on the salary. But where I messed up was, I didn't negotiate on anything else. All the other things that I didn't even know to get into because I didn't have enough sense to go around and ask the people who would have laid it out for me. So that's one thing I will say. Like, you got to be humble enough to get the mentoring you need. And this is a problem for men sometimes. I don't think I'm the only guy out there who thought, I got this. So, when you mess up like that, you better make it a teachable moment, because it won't be the last time you're presented with that opportunity to negotiate. The second thing I'll say is that we definitely need to negotiate. And I've had a lot of conversations with different people, and not everybody out there is comfortable in negotiating. You know, I'm not sure why, but I never had a problem with negotiating. I just didn't know all the things I was supposed to negotiate about. I'm actually one of these people that I don't mind going and buying a car and, you know, wheeling and dealing with the car salesperson, because I want to, you know, I just like doing that. So I would say that you do want to have a number in mind, but you don't want to be the first one to throw out the number. So I've had many conversations with people. They're like trying to get my number, and I'm trying to get their number because I don't want to throw my number out there. Because if the person says, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll hire you for that," then I'm like, "Wait, hold up, that had to be too low." So, you know, so there's a lot of, you know, verbal jousting that goes on. And the other thing I've learned is no matter what number comes out from the other person, never accept the first number. The worst that can happen is, you know, you throw out a higher number. The worst that can happen, they say no. You know, but I've been surprised many times they say, "Oh, okay, yeah, we can actually do that," or "We can come close to that." So this is a very good conversation, and I'm sure it's related to mental health, you know, somewhere. But, you know, just being able to negotiate, for me, I think is an indication of your worth, you know, your self-worth, and you want to get what you deserve. I think that's probably the lesson here.
Yeah.
What we
I would
Go
say
ahead.
two things very, very quickly, I promise. One is I think we benefit from tools like Glassdoor, where you can look up, employees are self-reporting their salaries at different companies. If the company that you are interviewing with is not reporting on Glassdoor, you can at least look at some other companies or organizations of similar size in a similar industry, just to get a sense for what the numbers should be. And I think those are tools that are really helpful, that are self-service tools. And then I'd say on the mental health side of this, does absolutely go back to our value, right? It goes back to this notion in our community that we have to work twice as hard to get half as far as everyone else. We shouldn't necessarily have to make half as much money as everyone else in order to show up in the workplace, right? And those conversations, when you find out, when you're not socially excluded, and you do get invited to go out to happy hour with the rest of the team, and somebody at the table starts complaining about their quarterly bonus number being lower, and everybody else is like, "Yeah, that was crazy. I was expecting that," and you're like, "I don't get a quarterly bonus. What are they even talking about?" Like, I've had that happen. That moment is really, really painful. And it sends you home and into a place where you feel really helpless. You feel stupid because you're like, how could I possibly have not known? This thing has been happening. I'm a pretty smart person. My parents have raised me better than this, right? So we have all of that moment around maybe I am not enough. Maybe I don't actually deserve to be here. And those thoughts that creep into our minds have a real physical effect on our body and how we show up. It shows up in our voice inflection. For me, sometimes it shows up in the tension in my shoulders and in my upper torso. Sometimes I'll see it show up and my leg starts bouncing kind of uncontrollably. And I'm like, I don't even know what's happening right now, right? These things trigger responses in our body that then sometimes make us speak up too much, make us not speak up in the moments where we should. Right? And then we get labeled as being quiet, or we get labeled as assertive or aggressive or confrontational, right? And these labels find their way into our performance reviews. We don't get promoted. We're held back. We're blacklisted inside of companies and organizations. And so the financial health and wealth that we experience has a direct correlation with our mental and physical wealth and our overall well-being, right? For ourselves and for our families. And so that's why the salary negotiations are really important, and thinking about the benefits, as you said, Dr. Neighbors, not just the overall salary number, but quarterly bonuses and signing on bonuses and year-end performance bonuses, all these other things that nobody ever talks to us about. People only talk to us about cracking our first $100,000 plus job, right? Once you've done that, you have made it. And that's kind of been the gold standard. That was what all my favorite rappers were rapping about in the 90s and early 2000s when I was coming up. $100,000, right? And once I made it there, and then I realized some of the other things that I was experiencing hadn't gone away. Some of those thoughts actually increased the higher my salary went, right? Was really when I realized I needed more help and I needed more support. I needed people to talk to, that the problem for me at that point wasn't a financial problem, right? I had thought solving my financial problem was going to solve everything. And then when the finances got solved and I was caught up on my cable bill and my car note was current and everything else was paid, I wasn't in danger of being thrown out of my apartment, and I still wasn't happy. It was because, as you said, Ms. McDay, the financial number, it was not actually my worth, right? But it took me hitting that and experiencing that success, which was important for me to also understand I still had more work to do after I had gotten there.
You really do. I think that one of the things I'd just like to throw in, just as a comment to follow up on what you just said, is that, the intrinsic self-worth is important as a value, but also think about this whole concept of materialism and material gain and how Eurocentric that thinking process really is. And as we've migrated toward more Eurocentric values of individualism and of materialism, it causes us distress. So I'm telling you that as someone who helps people in poverty every day, to overcome the distress of not being able to have things that other people have. So for a lot of the young single moms I see, that is their reality. And they're not hitting $100,000. So how do you stay healthy when that's not really an option or something that's in your foreseeable future? How do you manage? How did our ancestors do it? There was a study, I believe it was in Chicago, of men who were garbage men. And one of the ladies I work with, she always tells this story. And so they gave them this study to see how they felt, what was their job satisfaction, and, how they felt about being garbage men. And the outcomes were surprising. These men were happy. They were balanced, and they felt like we have a good income. We have a good job, and we can take care of our families. Now, this was in the 70s, but the reality is when we push towards this constant more and materialism and constant gain, it causes us emotional distress. So just think about that in terms of what we value. I'm going to go to the next question, unless you have something to add, Dr. Neighbors or Amari, or Mr. Ahrens, do you?
I would say most studies say that actually our level of happiness doesn't increase. I think it's after $70,000, right?
Really?
So even though there's this image planted in our heads of getting from 70 or 30 to 50 and 50 to 70 and 70 to 100 and 100 to 250 and beyond, and becoming millionaires and billionaires. A lot of the studies say, after 70,000, your happiness doesn't increase.
No.
So there's something to think about. I still want to test it. When I become a millionaire, I would love to be in Dr. Neighbor's study so you can test my level of happiness now and then. But I think that goes to your point around material wealth is one thing. There is a satisfaction of being able to be home and play with your kids, or be able to interact with your spouse or your partner, right? Be able to do things in the community, be an active member of your church or civic organization or fraternity and sorority. So there's a lot of ways in which we can experience happiness. We shouldn't put all of our eggs in one basket in terms of our employment.
I'll just say briefly, I saw a question pop up on the screen and then it went away, but oh yeah, there it is. This is a new technology for me. So I just wanted to comment briefly that the questioner, Mr. Sunderland, is correct. It's not always a failure in negotiation. I know we were kind of talking about our failures. And I know in my case, I considered it to be a failure because of my inappropriately inflated sense of self. I just was too young to know any better, I guess. So I think we have to own up to as much of the negative outcome as we can. Now, he mentions about seeking a less predatory culture. I'll just say that I never really felt that I was working in a predatory culture. It was a competitive culture, but there absolutely is no harm in changing jobs. You know, if you feel like, I mean, the culture is just so toxic. I was raised not to change jobs. Like I said earlier, my dad said, get a job, keep that job, retire from that job. So that's what I tried to do. But later on in life, I actually broke that rule, and I have moved around a little bit. And I think what we're going to find when we do change jobs is that we are employable. I mean, every job I've had, I've picked up skills. And if you're willing to step out on faith, because a lot of times you don't necessarily have a new job to walk right into when you leave your job. And I've left jobs because, you know, it just wasn't a good fit for me. I know that sounds a little privileged, but I just had a sense of confidence that I would find something. So I would say to Mr. Sunderland, if it is predatory, you got to move on.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left, and rather than pose a final question, I think I'd like to give you both time for closing remarks.
Okay, well, I went first on the open, so I'll let Mr. Aarons go first on the closing.
Oh man, Dr. Neighbors, I love hearing your comments, but I'll just start us. I'll say the wonderful discussion, and I'm so glad to have shared the stage with both of you and learn from both of your insightful comments. You know, if there is a silver lining in COVID and all that we've experienced over the past 18 months, and you know, you throw in state-sanctioned killings, you throw in a very contentious political climate. You throw in COVID happening, right? Just there's so many things that we can throw in. If there is a silver lining in COVID, I think it is that we're having more conversations like this, that we're thinking about and really acknowledging that we're all under an inordinate amount of stress, and that this environment that we're in right now is extremely stressful. We need spaces to talk about it. We need people to talk about it with. We need trusted colleagues. All the research around friendship and relationship shows that it is unplanned social interaction in close proximity that actually builds and sustains relationships and friendships. That's why we're friends with so many of our cousins that we played with over the summer, or people down the street, or people that we went to college with, or people that we were in cohort programs with. And COVID really limited our ability to do that because it wasn't safe to meet up. We had to be very planful, very careful. And so, you know, I'm appreciating to a certain degree that we are having more conversations like this to really break the stigma around mental health, to really be able to publicly say we all need a little bit more help, and there's no shame in that. There's actually a great deal of strength, and as Dr. Neighbors brought up one of my favorite words earlier, courage. There's a lot of courage in that as well. Black Executive Men in particular is an organization that is on a mission to help men, Black men, really to achieve inner peace, to think about all the ways that they can find success and peace in their life, financially, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so to find us, I'd say visit blackexecutivemen.com. You'll see information from our founder, Jewel Love, up there, ways that you can reach out and contact us. If you are on LinkedIn, there is a private group on LinkedIn. Black Executive Men is the name of the group. And if you want to have some conversations as well with me about salary negotiation or benefits negotiation, or I'm thinking about making this move, I'm happy to talk to you. You can find me at the Aarons Group. It's aaronsgroup.org, AARONS, aaronsgroup.org. Also on Facebook under Aarons Group LLC. And on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram, Aarons Group LLC, and all of those places. So thank you so much. It's really been great, my honor and my pleasure.
So I will sum it up very quickly. That the name of my research program is Man Up, Man Down. And we came up with that name because we think manning up to stress and problems works some of the time, but not all the time. So manning up, trying to man up to everything will definitely result in a man going down. But if you are the man down, if you reach out and talk to someone, you can be man up again before you know it. It's cyclical. So we say if you feel something, say something. Talk to just one person, and don't forget to tell the truth. And what you're going to find is that you are not alone. You will find there are other black men out there dealing with stuff. They're just not fessing up to it. And then once you get that out in the open, you've got not only a friend but a confidant, which is going to definitely help your emotional well-being. So I can be found at Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'll be happy to talk to you.
Okay, thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to close as the mental health therapist with two things. If you find yourself in any type of crisis, for our panelists or people you know, there are national numbers. One of the text lines, if you are in crisis and you want to seek counseling or find a local counselor, you can just text 741-741, 24 hours a day. That's a national text line if you know someone or you're concerned about someone in crisis. The next thing I'd like to leave you with is an African proverb, and I just want everyone to think about this and walk away with it. Proverbs bring to you what they need to bring to you, so they speak to everyone differently. But here's the one for today. No matter the economy of the jungle, the lion will never eat grass. So with that, I'd like to close. It was my pleasure. Have a good day to everyone.
Like, do you even know who you are? Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Give you something, you ain't know you want it. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something.
Welcome to our last panel of the evening. I am so excited to have you all here with us. How are y'all doing tonight?
Doing great, thank you.
Great.
Wow.
Awesome. This is going to be an amazing panel and a great conversation to finish our 4-week summit. So I will begin with reading the panel description. This is our DEI and corporate workplace part 2. We did this panel last year, so this is our part 2. Last year we had Netflix, Disney, Third Sector, and Rock Nation join us to discuss the efforts of top corporations to create safe workplaces for Black American employees. And we're checking in with corporations and companies this year to see how have you all translated the needs of Black employees over the last year and to continue to create safer work environments. I have 3 phenomenal panelists with me, but first, let me introduce myself because I always forget that. I go straight into like the good stuff, you all, and I forget to say who I am. I am Riel Jones. I created Black America Summit last year in response to how Black mortality was being portrayed with COVID and wanting to create a line of communication for Black Americans and our allies to talk to subject matter experts, industry leaders like yourself, because normally we don't really have as much access to you all, especially for free, without a paywall. So I'm excited to have you all join us. We're going to start with Corey Jones. He is the co-founder of Prism Works. PRISM work. And Corey Jones brings over 20 years of leadership in the creative and digital media industry to this conversation. As a creative leader, he's worked with breakthrough technology and consumer brands to craft relevant messages. His journey through corporate America allowed him to work with decision makers at companies like HP, PetSmart, Tequila, Patron Tequila, sorry, and PepsiCo, which we will let that slide today. I am from Atlanta. I'm from Decatur, where it's greater. Bias to Coca-Cola, but okay.
Well, I hail from North Texas, and PepsiCo is in the region here, along with Dr. Pepper.
FedEx, Lexus, Adobe, and so much more. He's currently proud to be the co-founder of Prism Work, a consultancy focused on cultural transformation in the workplace, so very relevant to today's conversation. We also have Mr. Michael Moore. He is a high-impact business and community leader, a board member, keynote speaker, and author, i.e. he does it all. He knows it all. And he is a thought leader on diversity and inclusion, social justice, African-American history, and brand strategy. He has degrees from Syracuse and Duke University, and he is currently the Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Blackball, the world's leading software company powering the global social good community. And we have Didi Orica Cecile. Did I say your last name?
Orica Cecile. That was pretty close. Yes.
Oh, and I've been practicing. I'm good at butchering a good name. I do it with such zest.
I was nervous actually for you, so that's perfect.
You're like, oh, how's this gonna come out? Didi is amazing. She leads Egon. Okay, now I'm gonna have to have your help.
Egon Zender. Egon
Zender's diversity, equity, and inclusion practice in the U.S. She is also a member of the firm's board, CEO, and leadership advisory practices. She consults on a wide range of talent acquisition and leadership solutions to help meet the challenges that many of her clients face as they seek to build and lead best in class organizations. Didi earned a JD from Columbia University School of Law, so please put some respect to her name. She has a master's degree in global health and development from Yale University and a BA in art from Williams College. Thank you all. That's a mouthful, but that just means y'all are very qualified for this conversation, perhaps overly qualified, which is great. And so I would like to begin the panel with an umbrella question, which I'm reading it back. I'm like, okay, this could have been a good second question, but we'll start with it. We'll keep it as our umbrella question. It's controversial. Is DI still important in corporate America today? And in this, I would like to hear why not? Perhaps I'll start with Corey since I introduced you first.
Sure. It's a great question, right? At Prism Work, the way we define DEI is through 21st century leadership. And in that you cannot achieve leadership at the 21st century level without a true understanding of inclusivity and creating and maintaining environments that encourage confidence, creativity, constructive change for everyone, and where everyone prospers. With all the mess that people at the margins have experienced, especially Black folks, at the consequence of poor and destructive leadership of American capitalists, focusing on the needs of women, people of color, LGBTQ, and indigenous people is long overdue. Leaders are still fumbling over bad practices from before the 19th and 20th centuries, and corporate leaders' visions for their people have to elevate and fundamentally shift how they consider and interact with employees. And for us, DE&I is table stakes. It's what you have to have mastered to get through the door of true 21st century leadership. So it is extremely important because we're still struggling with these challenges from centuries before.
And Michael?
Yeah, I think DE&I is even more important now than in the past. I mean, first of all, it's simply the right thing to do. Let's just say that. And sometimes companies have a hard time of acknowledging the moral element of this. Corporations and morality, oftentimes there's some tension there, perhaps. I didn't say that, but perhaps. and so I think it's the right thing to do. Secondly, I think it's the world is only getting smaller in the sense that technology, like the technology we're using right at this moment, is bringing people together far more easily with less sort of drag and difficulty. And so, as people from around the world find themselves doing business with each other, aspects of inclusion and sort of the benefits of diversity come into play. And then, look, from a business standpoint, there's all kinds of really compelling research from the likes of McKinsey and Deloitte and Gallup and others that just lay it out and say that there is a hard financial benefit to organizations that can figure out how to do D&I really well, that they can do. So all things being equal, your product or service is the same, your marketing spend, everything else is the same. If you can figure out how to do D&I well, you will have at times up to a third benefit over the competitors who haven't figured it out. So, I don't think diversity is going anywhere. I think the world is, as I said, getting smaller. And so I think it's imperative that organizations, that companies really lean into this and embrace it, because it's to their benefit to do so.
Mm-hmm. And Dee?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what else I can add except for, well, actually, there is something. Yes, it's important. And I think you had phrased it as kind of even in the last year, right? Is it still important? I would say it is still important, but it doesn't mean that the energy, the commitment, the determination, the advocacy is at the same levels, right? It's, if you look at the last year, and I suspect, this work, this topic, we all know on this screen, we all know that this isn't a new topic, right? We also know that it's like these things are nodal, and we're hopeful that right now we'll be able to kind of sustain momentum, interest, and investment, right? Because it is important. But I will say the reality is that, there's also some fatigue that I hear from clients, right? And for what it's worth, heightened attention came to this topic at a time where we were also quite focused on a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you're watching almost kind of, at least I'm hearing, not from everyone, but I am hearing this kind of up and down in terms of just people being tired in general. And therefore, now kind of these competing interests, and how do I spend my time, particularly in a corporate setting? What do I invest in? We have a lot, also the reality for many, right, that work is not there. This isn't quick fix work, right? And so I would definitely say that there's acknowledgement of the importance. And perhaps I think there's also kind of for some a realization that if we're going to make commitments and make these investments, this requires kind of sustained, it just requires sustained effort.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I think you brought up a really good point. When I started Black America Summit last year, I was chief of staff for a team of 200. And at that point, we were having conversations around protest and, all this stuff, Black Lives Matter, like all this was everywhere. We had statements being put up. And then like over the year, you kind of see like, we were going to do this project, but we're a little booked right now. So we're not going to do this project right now. Hopefully no one notices this. But like, it wasn't that we weren't still having some conversations. It was just like the fatigue. And like, also we had business like to keep going. And it was like, how do we keep that intensity of how much we were meeting and talking about these topics and, actually do our jobs in the business?
It's real. I think it's real, right? And I mean, some of the conversations, so our firm, we do a lot. I mean, the reason I talk to you, we spend a lot of time, obviously, talking to senior executives about this issue. And I found that a lot of the conversations up front, you had a split. You had some companies that have been doing this work for a long time, and you have companies that for the first time are waking up and thinking, oh my gosh. And the answer ranges from, let's look at our programs, let's look at our structure, let's look at incentives, let's just find somebody. Can you help us find a chief diversity officer to fix everything, right? You saw that range, right? And so that meant there was also kind of a range in terms of understanding what you're getting into and what this work requires in order to have the sustained impact, you know? And so for some, they're just starting to kind of feel that.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Did anyone want to add anything to that before I delve into the questions?
Well, I don't know if we might be going to where some of the questions may lead, but I like where we are now, right? There are a number of companies who, along with their black squares and their proclamations publicly, some of them actually pledged dollars, but no true account of where those dollars went, how they got distributed, and there are a number of companies, as Dee Dee just said, that have been doing the work, or that woke up and said, let's dive in and be really transparent about our process that we're just starting. Let's do an audit of who we have on our rosters, who's in leadership, how do we build. There's one client in particular that really worked this last year to build a cohort for Black and Brown young people leaders, to how they can be elevated and have their points of view considered. And they're continuing. So that's the thing, is they didn't just make this statement at the beginning of the year. They're coming back and saying, we want more. We want to expand our vision of what diversity means. And that is refreshing. But there are a number of companies that are still resting on the laurels of the black square that they posted 18 months ago. And that just ain't
Isn't that good enough? We did something. Social media team don't like persons outside of our branding guidelines. That was different.
Right.
So we've been talking a little bit, kind of foreshadowing the conversation. But before we go too deep into it, I would like for you all to define what DEI is to you all, and kind of how are y'all working towards this goal of DEI in your roles? Because I think it's very broad, and I've realized over the last year, I bring it up like, oh yeah, they're in DEI, and there'll be other people like, what is that? I know what diversity and inclusion is. What's the what's the
E? What is it? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that tends to be. I mean, that actually tends to be a conversation that kind of we start a lot often. When people are saying we want to do this work or we want a strategy. Should it be diversity, equity, and inclusion? Should it be diversity, inclusion, and belonging? Should it be Jedi? Should we have justice, equity? I mean, you get wrapped up in that. And so this goes to what it means to me, which is it's important because actually words do matter. And if you're going to put, and you hold yourself, a lawyer. So words matter.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the spirit of it, to me, I don't want the spirit of it to get lost in trying. For me, the spirit is creating inclusive spaces for all humans, right? And there are some boundaries, but the boundaries are the same boundaries we all have to live in a society where we protect and where we're safe, right? But outside of that, we're trying to create inclusive spaces for human beings. And I think that, unfortunately, for some, they have to remind people kind of what it means to be a human being, right? And that's almost like day 1, day 2, day 3, which is, right now, we happen to be in a moment, right, where a light is shining on a few different groups, but that's right now. 10 years from now, that light's going to be shining on someone else. And so for me, what it means is, what are the practices? What are the behaviors? What structures if we're talking about in the corporate setting, what structures are we putting into place? Policies, what transparency are we putting into place so that, right now the light may be on me and I will benefit, but if I really believe in this work, that light's going to shine on somebody else and these structures should benefit. So that's
I like that.
one person's point of view.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Yep.
Wholeheartedly agree that it is about creating these places of belonging where everyone can thrive. Everyone has the opportunity to be creative and curious and prosper, right? We look at 21st century leadership through these 6 traits. Most people might think decision-making or charisma or performance management as leadership skills, which they are, but we focus on 6, and we call it HARDY, which is humility, empathy, accountability, resiliency, transparency, and inclusivity. With all of these working together is how you can build these spaces that Didi was talking about, because you have a more inclusive point of view and you're understanding how to be more empathetic and accountable to the people you're leading. Everyone was challenged in this past 18 months through COVID. And everyone was required to have a bit of grace for the people that they're working with. And we were all challenged to be inclusive, right? It's one of those unique moments where, as Didi said, like the next challenge will come, and we're focused. There's a light on identity and gender in a lot of places in the workspace, but COVID expose all of these different areas of gap and need in our workforce, and how we can be more empathetic leaders for them, how we can enable them to do their best work on their time, in their best environment. And that through that challenge, you have to have a hearty standpoint. You have to be humble. You have to be empathetic. You have to be accountable to, are people going to come back into the office? How resilient are you as a group? And how transparent are you? Is everyone going to be tested? Is everyone going to have the vaccine? How are you communicating to your employees to help them navigate how they're going to do? Are they going to move to a different city? Or are they able to, or do they need to stay where they are? Being a transparent leader and an inclusive leader with all of it allows you to set the stage for your employees to make the best decision for themselves.
Inclusion was challenged in my household, I will say, and I'm not sure what I had the moments where I have 4 children and they wanted to be included on every Zoom, and
Oh, bless you and bless them.
there was a little bit of like, I'm practicing one thing and saying, but this space isn't for you right now. No.
Michael.
Yeah, I'll dive in. For us, we're a sort of global software company striving to be even bigger and even more global. And so I think, we buy what the research tells us, that when you can bring together diverse groups of people who have really different perspectives and expertise and just worldviews, that if you can create a platform where, a platform of inclusivity where everyone feels like they belong, where everyone feels like their contributions are valued, then I think you unlock just enormous amounts of productivity, of innovation, of real, sort of magical thinking. And so that's what I think we are trying to do. It's a challenge. Most people kind of grow up with people who are similar to them, and work may be the first time that many people have ever been forced to kind of interact with people who might be different than they are. And so I think what we're trying to do is just create a sense of awareness and provide tools to our employees to empower them to leverage diversity in ways that can be, of benefit to all. And I think that again, as Didi was saying, there are a lot of kind of acronyms and things, and we are focused on all of them. Ultimately, kind of we wrap it up in sort of just a D&I, but certainly equity, ensuring that all employees have equal access to resources and to opportunity is critically important. So,
I like that. I like the idea of everybody having access to opportunities and it not being, because I know traditionally, even in the last panel, we talked about some employees feeling like there's like glass ceilings, or that they can't progress up to certain roles and things like that. So I think that's really important as we start to talk about DE&I. And
yeah, let me just interject, because again, part of what I tell people all the time is glass ceilings don't really serve anybody.
Yeah.
If business is a very competitive endeavor, obviously, and it's like tug of war. And so if you've got a team of people on your side of the rope pulling, and some people can only give a certain percentage, less than 100%, then you are by definition, kind of retarding the overall productivity of your group, of your team, of your organization. And so particularly in public organizations where profit sharing and the like are important, like everybody needs to be empowered so that everybody can benefit from the diversity. And again, oftentimes people who look like us are advocating for these kinds of things.
Yeah.
But, diversity and inclusion, doing it well, benefits everybody. It benefits everybody in an organization.
Yeah, definitely. And this kind of segues us into my next question, and that's around like the work environment. And I'm thinking about how, hey, what is like a hostile work environment, and how does DEI help create a safe work environment? I will try to bridge the two thoughts that I'm having around what Michael just said, because I'm thinking how employees who feel comfortable and they feel like they belong and they can really do their work, I feel like bring all their full selves to the job and their creativity, whatever it is, like versus if it's a hostile work environment, then you're closing off portions of yourself or you're just trying to get the job done. Like I've personally been there where I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going through. Let me just put my head down and get through this. And then I had feedback like, oh, well, before you were giving these great ideas, we were using this, this, and this. And it's like, well, I don't feel connected to that part because I don't feel safe here and delving deeper into that. So that's kind of where I'm going into like the next question of asking what is a hostile work environment and how can DI help create safe work environments? And anybody can take this.
I mean, I'll just jump in really quickly because I think you answered the question, right? I think if someone's in an environment where they don't feel like they belong, where they don't feel like they can be their authentic selves, where they don't feel like their contributions are really valued, then they're not going to be able to do their best, or they're certainly not going to bend over backwards in that kind of a situation. And so, and some environments may not even be hostile or caustic, but they just might be indifferent to differences and thereby make people who are different, feel like they don't quite fit in. And so that's where I think, the huge benefit, first of all, you've got to have, to gain the benefit of all this, you've got to have diverse folks on your teams. And that's, a recruiting and talent acquisition challenge for lots of organizations. But then you've also got to work on your corporate culture, on your organizational culture, to make sure that once you have those people who might be different, who might bring different angles and different perspectives that can help, sort of the overall productivity, you've got to then, ensure that they feel comfortable, sort of doing that. I'll just give you a quick little story. I had a consulting company. I was I had a boutique brand strategy firm for a long time. And I started a little sub practice where I intentionally brought in people, mostly friends of mine, but from very different backgrounds. We had a sort of a quick serve kind of a consulting practice where we went in, were presented with lots of information on a problem or a strategy challenge or something, processed it really quickly, and then delivered it back. And the group, I would bring in people who didn't know anything about brand strategy, physicists, financial person, English, person. But I brought in these people, all of whom knew me. We all knew each other. We all trusted each other. And people knew that even though they might not know anything specific to the problem at hand, they knew how to ask questions. They knew how to solve problems, and they knew how to listen and process information. And so we created this really dynamic interaction. And so on a very short, sort of small basis, I've lived kind of the benefit of D&I and seen how it works.
And the trust was there. Let's add that too. Like
that's what made it. Yeah, that's what made it work. Is because that physicist, didn't feel like, okay, like I really don't know what they're talking about, but I have this thought. He felt totally empowered to just say, well, hey, what do we think about this?
Yeah,
and it worked.
Corey, Dee, do you have any thoughts on how D&I can help create safe work environments versus hostile work environments?
It gives
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Go, Dee. Go.
I mean, it gives us one. I mean, I don't know. I feel as though I hear discussions more and more, inviting conversations around psychological safety in the workplace and what that means, and actually for some, I mean, there are different degrees of when we're talking about that environment, right? To some degree, there's some people who feel concerned about some sort of backlash, right? Some sort of, is for being themselves and kind of having the negative consequences of actually, because of stereotypes that come along with, what you might be doing that might cause some backlash. And how do you create a space, again, going back to this notion of trust and actually kind of a lack of fear, right? Feeling as though it's not just that you're going to have a space to speak, but that there isn't going to be some sort of retaliation and then in the best case scenario that you then also that your thoughts and points are taken into consideration and really absorbed. So I think this time and with DEI, it's actually opened and invited a conversation around that, right? And what does it mean to have that space? The other thing I wanted to note is this notion of, we spend a lot of time trying to bring all these different voices and a unique, everybody wants to bring somebody in who has unique experience and a unique, background and unique, and then they come in and I'm sure you've heard of this concept of like, there's like the only, like, and then you come in and you're like, oh my gosh, I come in and nobody else is like me. Right. And wait, I'm the only one, I'm the only one here who I don't know. There's lots of there are lots of ways to be only. However, what I'm finding is actually a distinction, and again, this conversation and this tension with DEI, which actually can find the good pieces of being that and saying, no, there are some things that are unique to a whole set of experiences you bring. We want to make sure that we're optimizing and kind of making sure that you can bring that fully. We just don't want you to make you feel like you're an other.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want you to feel, and so having those conversations, particularly with senior executives, with managers, like people who are now responsible for bringing in, for developing, for creating opportunities, having those conversations at that level so that they understand the implications of certain behavior. So I think DEI gives a window and a platform, or really talking about inclusive leadership gives people the opportunity to have conversations like this and become aware of things that they may or may not be doing to create an environment that's actually mental.
You actually made me think of I don't want to say the stereotype, but like a running joke that I heard before I got into the workforce. And then once I was in the workforce, it was actually kind of true of why are more than two Black people together? Like I can't think of like the wording for the joke. Yeah, more than two of us together, then it's something. And I remember like always hearing it in the they're up to something, they're in cahoots, like something's about to happen. And like I was like, oh, that's just crazy. But then when I entered the workforce, I noticed like people really being like, hey, it's just you and me talking. We can't all have lunch together. We can't all like, wow, this is crazy. But it creates that environment. And I'm sure most of the white employees aren't actively thinking that all the Black people are trying not to congregate together because it's going to make a scene or whatever. But like you said, there are things that aren't spoken and, that leadership can think about when you do have people, other voices in the room and a part of the conversation. Corey. Yep.
I'll just say that I've been at places where that has been said out loud, right?
Oh.
As a joke, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, all the Black people is something to brew, is something afoot.
What are y'all doing in here?
What's going on? And so it's not just us talking about this stuff. It is hinted at, intimated, and so it becomes a thing. It's part of that underlying subculture, right? Even if I can say it as a just joke. But what's so interesting is that point of conversation always comes up, the minorities that group together, but no one ever turns the light the other way and say, look at all these white tables, look at all these rooms with all white folks in here, or all white men.
By this lunch table, what's going on?
Right, exactly. And so it's when you focus on that you start to understand, wow, there's a whole paradigm that needs to shift. And honestly, Black people are congregating because for support. in this a life raft in this hostile, more than likely hostile environment. And I think, let's be clear, I think to really prove a hostile work environment, it has to be discriminatory of a long period, not investigated, and it's impossible for you to do your work. And so who determines it's impossible? I think Dee Dee touched on it very well when we think about psychological safety of how do your individual coworkers, how psychologically safe do they feel doing their work with you and the people around you. And sometimes it is also just building rapport. It's not necessarily a hostile work environment, but as Michael so eloquently talked about his startup and the friends and the trust that they have, as leaders, we have to take that extra effort to build rapport with these people that we're just meeting, with these people that we're onboarding, that come from different places, don't look like us. When you build that rapport, when you make that connection, it allows people to say, hey, I have psychological safety to not only just be myself and belong, but to, as you started this reel, to say, I feel comfortable offering, added value and ideas and thoughts to the discussion because I feel like this is a place that's safe, that I belong, and that my ideas will hold credit and be valued.
I'm sorry. I was about to say something else and I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. But I do appreciate that. What are like some examples of positive DEI like in action? I know, Corey, you started to talk about this before, like different strategies companies have been using over the last year. What are some strategies that you all have seen? It doesn't have to be in your company. It could be just in the industry that you're like, wow, they actually got it and they did this really well. Like a company, like and thinking about a DEI initiative that they started perhaps over the last year or so, 18 months.
Well, I'll just jump in really quickly. I think to be successful, to do this well, you have to be intentional about it, and I think that's where you start at least. And so much of a lack of inclusion is just the fact that people aren't thinking about anybody who's not like them. And therefore you end up with not that many of those people in your organization, and you're not thinking about what, not only sort of how they might experience your organization differently, but also what they might be able to add that you're not sort of ordinarily getting. I think obviously creating awareness and training and look, inclusion is all about moving hearts and minds. It's about getting people to think differently and then act differently. I'm a huge proponent of metrics as a way to, in the same way that you would manage and guide any other aspect of an organization, a business, using metrics, whether that's sort of quantitative data from your employees that you would survey on an annual basis on how they are feeling about D&I, or whether it's looking at just raw demographic numbers in your organization, whether it's looking at key roles in leadership and tracking, how things are going. I think there's a lot of tactics that organizations can adopt, embrace, but at the end of the day, is your leadership, have they sort of bought into this? Have they embraced this? Are they creating incentives and holding other senior managers accountable for this? And are you tracking numbers in a way to let you know how you're doing? That's kind of at a really, really high level.
Yeah. Corey. And you don't have to if you don't.
I mean, it's a tough spot. It's almost like you're asking, who do we give a gold star to? Last year.
A good this year.
And while there's been some great efforts, and we have wonderful clients who are taking this journey. Some have been on it for a while and have invited us in, and some others are starting to do this work and doing workshops on what does it mean, like taking men's cohorts, and what does it mean what does allyship mean? What does it truly mean to mentor, sponsor, and advocate for non-men, for women and LGBTQ people in the workplace? How do you build rapport with teams? We worked with the Snow Sports Industries of America to have a series of workshops and built a playbook on how they could make the slopes more inclusive, I'm not a big skier or winter sports person, but they are really opening up the slopes for people. And they said, hey, we want to know what that means to be more inclusive. I'll call out Netflix, not one of our clients. I think they're doing a wonderful job of elevating Black executives and hiring more people. I see on LinkedIn every now and then in my network, someone else has joined the Netflix team, and that's exciting. However, on the flip side of that, there's some areas of growth too. The CEO still talks about wanting people to come into the office. Believe that Netflix, where we watch videos, they want people to come to the office. It makes no sense. So in the area of like COVID and the new world of work and hybrid workplace, there are some people, while they might be getting DE&I right in that sense, when it comes to the new challenges that we're facing, they're falling short. They're still trying to fall into the old paradigms, which affects Black and brown people disproportionately, rushing people back unvaccinated into the office without safe spaces. That is detrimental to the community of all of their constituents. And so while there's a great amount of effort and wonderful things to celebrate, we're in a quandary because there's still some of those same mistakes or those same challenges hold us back.
Yeah, we actually had someone respond that their leadership is focused on promoting minorities in leadership positions. They do get there, they still don't know how to deal with the minority leaders now. So like thinking about this, how can corporations start to prepare themselves? And I know that we have all gone through the unconscious bias trainings at this point. So like without saying we're going to throw them through another one of those those classes, how can we try to like actually make the leadership roles safe for minority, but right now we're talking about Black Americans, so Black employees who are getting pulled into these higher roles, and before there wasn't any space for them in that leadership circle.
I was actually going to comment on that, and what some companies are doing, and the kind of tension between wanting to have, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. You've heard that, right? Mm-hmm. And so you want to have, I think you want to set a course, you want to set a direction, and companies are still trying to figure out the best ways to hold people accountable, right, along those, right? At the same time, sometimes, you have the example, I won't say which one, but like there are some large global financial institutions, for example, that have given financial incentives to executives for diversifying their teams through recruitment. However, incentives, what that resulted in was an influx of candidates, employees from underrepresented groups without much attention to then what happens when you get there. So everybody was doing their part to recruit, and not thinking, so that goes to this point, but not thinking about what's the experience going to be like when you get there. Yeah. And therefore what happens is a year from now, 2 years from now, they're gone. Right? And the executive has that year bonus that they got for doing it, but the person's gone. So that's success. The question is, and what I have seen, in addition to kind of companies really trying to think through the whole life cycle, an employee that comes into an organization, what's the experience, what are the touch points, how do they contribute to it? Companies are thinking that way and trying to be more holistic. And some companies are really focused on inclusive coaching, inclusive leadership coaching. So what does that mean? It means that the CEO, the COO, the C-suite, and maybe C-1 starting there, who have dedicated time, right? That is time that they are like committed to weekly or monthly, what have you. They actually are doing these coaching sessions, right? Because the idea is, let's figure this out with you. You're going to then practice with your team. You're going to do this with your leaders. Your leaders will do it with their leaders, and what have you. So you're hoping for this kind of cascade, if you will, of actually shifting behaviors around leadership. You're talking about 21st century, right, leadership principles, and it's like, how do you coach for that, right? And have you actually practice and do the work. I think part of that coaching is to find ways to go back to the humanity point, having all leaders think about when they've been, kind of vulnerable, when they haven't been included, right? And actually using that and tapping into that humanity piece, and then bringing that back to how they lead in an organization. So that's something I'm seeing more. And we'll see, kind of how effective. But what happens is you need that light bulb to go off, right? See a shift in behaviors.
Absolutely. I'd also add, I think part of that, to answer the comment, some of that comes from there's still a lot of us being the only in the room. And there are studies that show when you have more than one person of an ethnic group, 2 to 3 actually really is where you start to feel that sense of belonging and connectivity, and people feel empowered to share their ideas freely. And there's a contingent that the majority group or the legacy group has to adjust to and change to accommodate. And that's where the growth happens. That's where the push and pull of how you define the culture and how you start to evolve the culture happens. And when you isolate people, they don't feel as empowered. They don't feel as supported. So, of course, they're discarded and their views aren't heard. And it absolutely is a revolving door for Black leaders to get elevated and then say, they don't know how to treat new leaders here. They don't know how to onboard. They don't know how to navigate what a new culture means when we step into the room. I need to go somewhere else.
Yeah. I even know that firsthand of being in a leadership role in a all-white leadership team. And then once I had the role, they're like, "You're not actually a leader. Well, we're going to keep you all the same responsibilities and all of that, but we're not going to give you any of the other, like, you're not going to be on track. We're not going to include you in all of the leadership stuff, but you still have the numbers. You still have goals. You still have people you're managing, but we're not going to say you're a manager." Like, I love the team, but because the leadership wasn't prepared to have someone who wasn't white to be a part of it, it was like, we want on paper you to do this stuff, and we love that the team loves you, but somehow we can't really incorporate you fully into what we see as leadership. So I think it is important that we do continue to have these conversations, especially at senior levels, and for there to be a way. And in that company, there wasn't a way to fix it because they were above me. It would just like keep managing up. And after 6 months of trying to manage up, it was like, this is really impacting my mental health, you know? So that brings me to the next question. Is something that Michael started to bring up earlier. It's like, you're doing all these statistics, you're listening to the Black employees, their feedback over the last year and a half. What are some things that you all are hearing from employees? It doesn't have to be, it could be as general as you need it to be. I don't want you to give away any of your companies, like whatever. But what are some things that you feel like Black employees generally are right now saying that they need more of from their corporations? Maybe we make it a little bit more general. Yeah. And I ask this because I feel like when I talk to other Black people, they know what other Black people are asking for right now. But when I talk to leadership, sometimes it's a little bit murky. It's like they want more equity. Like, they want like, okay, what is that? What does that mean? So what when people are coming to you all, or you're hearing all this stuff in the news, what are you hearing? What does it translate to you as people in leadership or in this space?
Well, from the perspective of the people, what Black employees are wanting, it's the same as what I've heard before. I don't know if I'm leading to your next question, but it's a more appreciation in the form of higher salaries, better opportunities, and access to leadership, and empathy from leadership. Right? It's how do we get those things from leadership, the things that they freely share amongst themselves, and with other white people. How can Black people get those same things? And now in the times of COVID, it's how to keep us safe. That would be the one difference, I think, is how do you keep us safe? But the rest of it, I don't think there's been much of a change.
I hear people visibility, like people wanting to be seen, right? And And then there's some, then there's like the comments, the side comments here and there, which is, and I want them to see me, not see who they think I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right. So, I don't know, I shouldn't say we've all had these. I can't speak for anybody else's experiences, but I know I've had these, and I know people have told me about these, where you have these experiences where you walk into the room for a meeting and you heard so and so talking to somebody else in one way, but then you walk into the meeting and all of a sudden they change how they're speaking to you, the references that they're bringing up, as if they expect that, okay, because I look this way, I'm supposed to,
You
do
gotta
X,
get the
Y,
hey
and Z.
girlfriend.
As we crazy, as
I
we
can't
could,
call you by your name, your girlfriend now.
like, oh, wait a second, huh? Like, that, like, so if I'm going to be real, like, right, this is supposed to be a real conversation.
Yeah.
People are like, I want you to see past, I want you to see me, like, I want you, but I have a lot of experiences, right? And they all matter. They all matter. So it's not like, me being a Black woman in this space is important because actually I've been in places where it's caused me to develop certain skills, and that's going to be helpful here. At the same time, I also want you to see that, I have my brain can organize chaos in a certain way because I went like, so people are asking for that, and they want to be seen. And it's almost like in some ways, especially if I look at the last 18 months, because there's been this like ping ponging or kind of this like, we now have to make up quickly. People are kind of getting pulled into discussions, pulled into meetings without any thought as to kind of why you're pulling that person in. And so they fall back on simple stereotypes and ways of communicating. And to your point about your own experience, they're not really being seen for who they are. They're just kind of being seen as, now we have to fix this thing and we're going to fix it with you.
Yep.
Yeah. Doesn't mean that they don't also still want, everybody wants that. Like, it doesn't matter. I think everybody wants to be paid more and to be valued for your work and to be paid. I don't want to discount that.
Yeah, I'll just acknowledge that this is all complicated stuff.
Yes.
Like what we're asking our organizations to do is to counterbalance, centuries of ways of thinking and and everything else that have marginalized and subordinated, people who look like us and women and people who are just different. And so acknowledging that it's complicated, I think what people want at a really high level, they just want to be treated like a human being, just like everybody, just like the others, just like people in the majority. Part of what makes, and I don't know if you all feel this, part of what makes this exhausting work is because every day, to some degree or another, you are fighting for your sense of humanity among others who haven't quite gotten to the place where they can acknowledge the complete humanity of someone who looks like you. And I try not to think of it at that level too much, just for the sake of my sanity.
Yes.
But yeah, different organizations, different companies are engaging. Everyone's heard this analogy of it's a journey, and in reality, I guess it is. And people kind of get on the journey at different places. I think we're all, most of us are headed sort of in the same direction toward trying to figure out this diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice kind of journey. I think some organizations are doing it because they think it's like a hot button thing because of last spring, and they see other organizations in their spheres kind of doing it, and so they're like, okay, yeah, we got to jump into this too. Yeah, I think other organizations really see the benefit and are really getting after it, but yeah, it shouldn't be, but it's complicated, hard, kind of work.
I have one last question that I would like to squeeze in if we can. It's about the Black women and our statistics. So since I was at Wellesley doing social science research, I've always had a pet peeve around how we identify women in statistics. And yes, women's, like any race or ethnicity group, is added in that bucket. but a lot of times we let the statistics of white women skew the statistics for all the women of color in the room. And so when we look at the workplace and we're looking at statistics, I've worked on events and they're like, oh, we need diversity, we'll bring in a white woman, which I understand why we want to track white women's participation in the workforce. But a lot of times that eclipse like the having statistics around Black women in workforces. So how can companies who want to put out data around women participation or whatever diversity, how can they make it clear if their statistics for women is highly influenced by like 90% of it's white women, if 3% is Black and 2% Asian and whatever, and the rest is like other, how can they start to make it a bit more clear? Because it's not, unless you look at like Black people, then that's when you really get to think about Black women and Black men.
I think they could make it clear by taking a little bit more time to break out what they share. Right? I mean, the reality is some of that historically, well, and what we see, what companies choose to report, reporting outside of kind of maybe some of the recent kind of efforts to mandate certain activity and certain reporting, but outside of that, right? It's what we see, what research is done, or what companies share with us, right? There are lots of reasons they're sharing it. So if you have collected a bunch of data and you look at your data, and unfortunately, some of your stats aren't that great, but you have a few that are fantastic, right? And maybe you're on that, to Michael's point, you're on a journey, but you don't want people to be discouraged, and then you choose to pick out, that's the thing with science, that's the thing with stats,
Yeah.
right? They'll tell you what you want them to tell you. So they'll pull out the stats, right? That help us showcase the story. We've made a lot of progress, and we've made a lot of progress, along these dimensions. So it goes to your point, but I think what they have the capability, and now it's like, are they tracking these things? Are they doing that work? And I think probably now we're going to hear from a lot of companies. A lot of companies are now doing even that next step, right? They actually are starting to break down that data and report. It's some, not all.
Well,
Right?
that gives you some courage because I haven't seen it yet.
Right? It's starting to happen. And part of it, honestly, I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't want to dominate the piece, but we're talking particularly right now. We're talking about gender, right? But I think actually, and that I think even recently, we've just seen even kind of an awakening for how individuals, how companies, how are even talking about gender, right? And like even for this, you had asked us kind of what are our preferred pronouns, right? So the discourse is shifting. It's becoming a bit more nuanced, advancing, and I think you'll start to see kind of some of that nuance starting to show up in data for some companies. Not all, but I think because the kind of cultural conversation is becoming more nuanced, hopefully we'll see more of that.
Wonderful. I will go ahead.
I was just going to say this is, I mean, right along the lines, do have something to plug, and this question seems like a setup, but at Prism Work, we're actually conducting research right now about what the future of the corporate workplace looks like when it's centered on women of color. So we are conducting a survey. We've already done some focus groups and salons. We're going to do a few more after the insights of these surveys. It closes this Sunday, actually. Where if you can take 15 minutes, we want to hear your voice of what does the workplace look like centered on women of color. That's Black women, brown women, Asian, indigenous. We are women. White women are also welcome to take the survey, but we are trying to make sure that we can construct and develop the narrative when Black women get to tell the story, when Asian women get to tell the story, because as we've discussed earlier, when you can center Black people of color, women of color, all boats rise, everyone rises. So we want to hear the story of what that is. So please, we'd ask you to participate.
And I just dropped the link in the chat for people who want to search that. So we just have 2 minutes left. I want to be respectful of your time because I know you're busy and y'all were gracious enough to donate an hour to us. So wrapping it up, do you all feel hopeful for the future as you look into DE&I space, the work that you're doing? Just like, are you hopeful that it can get better for Black employees, that it could be a safer, more positive work environment in
So I'm
America?
going to jump in really quickly just to say that to do this work, you have to be hopeful. Otherwise, because again, if you look at the history, the hundreds and years of history of
Yes.
people of African descent in this country, then there's plenty of data, overwhelming data, to not be hopeful. So I think people who are in these kinds of roles, you've got to be hopeful, unless you're that rare person who just enjoys banging your head against the wall.
I would agree. I'm definitely hopeful. I mean, I don't know. I listen to and talk to people who are coming into the workplace, and questions people ask, the expectations, the demands, right? And I'll call them demands. Like there's a fight for talent right now, right?
Mm.
And it's real. And so all of a sudden you're seeing this topsy-turvy nature where people in the C-suite are like, well, we need to hire. And they're like, what are we going to do? And how are we going to attract great talent? And people coming in saying, well, I'd like to know more about your DEI strategy. How come when I looked at your website, nobody looks like me? And
Right.
I did a double click. How come you in your report, to your point, you reported these numbers and not these? So people, I think I'm hopeful because I think just starting to see a shift in who's driving the conversation.
But real quick, the other thing you've got to look out for is companies who there's lots of diversity, lots of color on the website and in sort of external communications, but it's a very different story internally.
Internally.
Oh,
So that's the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
We're going to bring that up next year.
That's next year.
Hey, Corey, are you hopeful?
I would just echo, yes, absolutely hopeful. The reason I have hope is because I'm actually sitting in those rooms or in the Zooms, and whereas before I was maybe seeing leaders who would dismiss concepts or ideas, actually, now this is still just as troubling sometimes, but seeing them wrestle with the idea of what new leadership looks like, and they're coming out on the other side of it. So that is what gives me hope in that instance, is that they would continue it and further it, because there are some people that are struggling, that their thinking's getting troubled, and it's making it a better way.
Yeah, we're going against away the grain, the way some people have been thinking. So to wrap it out, how can people follow you all, or their websites, information for the things that y'all are doing that they can look up, things like that? Books, any of that? Yep. This is the time to tell them.
I'm just promoting right now the survey, that the link is in there. Please take all women, please take that survey. You can find any of our information at PrismWork or prismwork.com. My personal handles are at Creative Corey, CreativeCorey.
Thank you. Michael.
Since we're having a long name is a problem.
Or you can also drop it in the chat.
I'll have to drop it in the chat because I'm like.
Yeah, for me, you can just find me either on LinkedIn, Michael B. Moore, and I'm at Blackbaud, or for some more creative, political, social stuff, you can go to my site, afrocentric.me.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us today and wrapping up our second annual Black America Summit. I appreciate you all so much for this wonderful conversation. I learned a lot, and I think our audience gained a lot of really great insight. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This
was great.
Yeah,
thank you for the wonderful conversation.
Oh, my pleasure.
Like, do you even know who you are?
Thank you all for joining us. I hope you all will follow our Black America Summit pages, as well as check out our Black America podcast. That's how we continue these conversations more in depth. These topics, we really pull them deeper. Right now, we're looking at combating voter suppression, starting in Georgia, then Michigan, and Texas. So until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you then.